Klopp had rehearsed every moment of this dinner. The table was centered with white candles, hand-picked wines from his family, estate, and a menu designed by the personal chef they both adored. But none of that really mattered, because he already knew the answer, or he thought he did. He reached into his suit pocket and set a small velvet box between them. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. She looked at the box, then at him. "Open it," he said, his voice low and confident. "My amazing family, this is Dr. Phillips. Welcome to Love and Twilight, where emotions meet the beauty of mystery. Here, we dive into timeless tales of passion, unspoken feelings, and the magic of connections that bloom beneath the stars. Whether it's stories of romance that warm the heart or moments of twilight that stir the soul, this channel is your escape into a world of love, longing, and wonder. Stay tuned. Your next unforgettable story begins right here." Now let's resume to our story. Claudia didn't move right away. She stared at the box for a moment longer, then reached out, flipping the lid open. The emerald-cut diamond caught the light, refracting against the flame of the candle between them. It was flawless, like everything Klopp chose. Still, she didn't say anything. He leaned back, not smiling, not nervous, just certain. "Claudia, be my wife." There was no one else in the restaurant. Klopp had reserved it for the night, not for romance. He hated the performative aspect of affection, but for control, for ease. He didn't like variables. Claudia had always been predictable. Until now. Her fingers closed the box. And then she looked up. "I love you," she said, clearly, evenly. "But are you in love with me? Or with the version of yourself that I help sustain?" The table went quiet. The city lights below seemed to dim. Klopp's breath caught in his chest, just for a second. Then he gave a short laugh, more reflex than amusement. "Claudia," he said, trying to steady the air between them, "you've always known what I am." "Yes, I have," she replied. "That's why I'm asking." Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't hurt. It was the voice of someone who had spent a long time understanding a man most people didn't dare question. He looked at her, really looked at her. She had been in his life for 7 years, started as an assistant, rose to executive advisor, then became the one person in his orbit who never flinched when he raised. His voice never chased status, never made her loyalty conditional. And now she was asking if he felt anything. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to grab her hand and insist she was everything. But Klopp Woods had never lied to himself. And in that moment, the silence became heavy with something he had never tasted before: doubt. Still, Claudia didn't walk away. She didn't cry. She simply held his gaze for a moment longer, then picked up her wine glass and sipped. "I'll marry you," she said finally, setting the glass down. "But I need you to ask yourself that question again before our vows." He nodded, lips pressed together, throat tight, because he didn't know the answer. The wedding was on the cover of 3 magazines. 200 guests, 100,000 roses, live orchestra, a guest list that read like a global who's who. Claudia wore custom Italian silk, designed in Paris. Her walk down the aisle was graceful, eyes forward, shoulders relaxed. She smiled at him, not like a woman swept off her feet, but like someone steadying herself on purpose. He wore black. They said their vows under a crystal canopy. "I promise to be your partner," Claudia said, placing the ring on his finger. Klopp repeated the line. He didn't believe in overcomplicated vows. Simplicity was efficient. They kissed, and just like that, she became his wife. In the first month, Claudia adjusted seamlessly. She took over soft operations across 3 of his firms, liaised with high-net investors, charmed shareholders' wives, at charity events, and returned to their penthouse each night with takeout in one hand and paperwork in the other. On nights he came home early, she wore silk or lace, depending on his mood. She never demanded affection. She just made space for it. She didn't talk much about her day. She'd learned quickly that Klopp preferred short summaries over emotional detail. He never said thank you, but he didn't need to. His presence was affirmation enough, or so he believed. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate her. He did. He just didn't know how to show it. 3 months after the wedding, something started to shift. Not loudly, not obviously, but Claudia noticed. He stopped looking at her during meetings. When she spoke, he nodded without really listening. And when they made love, it felt transactional, polished, precise, like he was checking off another box. She didn't bring it up. Instead, she adjusted. She spent more time at the wellness center she'd invested in before the marriage, read more at night, took solo walks in the evenings, not out of distance, but out of protection. Then the intern arrived, young, sharp, technically competent, and eager to be noticed. Claudia watched the way Klopp's eyes followed her across the conference table. She noticed the extra few seconds he lingered when the intern smiled at his jokes, the occasional shift in his posture when she walked into a room. She didn't confront him, because she already knew. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't even about love. It was about something Claudia couldn't give him anymore, not because she wasn't enough, but because he no longer knew how to want someone who didn't orbit around him. The affair happened quickly. The media didn't miss a beat. Photos, headlines, speculations. Claudia watched it all unfold with the grace of someone who'd already prepared herself for the blow. When the divorce papers came, she signed without delay. She declined alimony. She accepted the Hamptons' house, not because she needed it, but because she didn't want him using it as a gesture of control. Klopp didn't try to explain, didn't try to fight. He offered her silence, and she took it like a gift. From the outside, Claudia Woods lived a dream most women only imagined. Her name had changed, her wardrobe had doubled, and her signature was now attached to major philanthropic projects and corporate development boards. She walked into boardrooms with presence, hosted investor dinners without ever spilling into awkward silence, and handled quarterly crises with the calm precision of a woman who had rehearsed every outcome. People admired her. Men envied him. She was the envy of lifestyle magazines, interviews, spreads, behind-the-scenes footage of their London home. Everything was sleek, tasteful, orderly. Yet not once did she ever feel like it was hers. Not the penthouse, not the applause, not even the man who shared her bed. Klopp Woods had a routine. His mornings began with emails, followed by silence over breakfast while reading market updates. Claudia made it a point not to interrupt. She preferred to speak after he finished. Most evenings he arrived home late, sometimes after midnight, smelling faintly of scotch and sterilized ambition. If he wasn't too exhausted, they would have sex. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't rough. It was intentional, like everything he did. But Claudia couldn't shake the feeling that she was a box he was checking. It wasn't that he wasn't affectionate. He was. When prompted, he'd touch her back as he walked by. He'd slide his arm around her waist at public events. He even remembered anniversaries without reminders. But none of it ever reached past the surface. She felt like a polished reflection of the man he wanted to be, not the woman he truly saw. They shared a home, but not a rhythm. Claudia made adjustments. She stopped leaving notes. He never read them. She cut down on home-cooked dinners. He preferred pre-ordered gourmet delivered precisely at 7:30 p.m. She attended therapy sessions by herself, never once mentioning them to him. She began filling her journal again, not with complaints, but with facts. April 4th. He didn't notice I cut my hair. Not a single glance. May 12th. He said I was efficient today. Not beautiful. Not radiant. Efficient. June 8th. He looked at the new intern today, the way he used to look at me. The intern's name was Bryn. Claudia knew because she reviewed her onboarding file before HR forwarded it. Bachelor's degree from NYU. Sharp references. Pretty, in the unassuming way women sometimes are before they learn what power looks like. Claudia didn't blame her. She didn't even blame Klopp. Not at first. There was something mechanical about the attraction, something inevitable. Claudia had been in the business world long enough to see how proximity and silence brewed curiosity. What unsettled her was how little effort Klopp made to hide it. He began sitting closer in team meetings. His eyes lingered longer during presentations. He laughed at things Claudia knew weren't funny. She started scheduling herself out of shared meetings. Let Bryn take more lead on small-scale strategy sessions. Watched from a distance as her husband leaned into a woman who knew nothing about his demons, only his title. One evening, Claudia stood in the mirror of their bathroom, staring at her reflection. She looked good. Objectively so. Her skin was clear. Her body still held grace and curve. She knew what heels to wear with which dress. She knew which perfume made heads turn in boardrooms and bedrooms alike. But she no longer recognized her eyes. They looked vacant, not broken, not bitter, just quiet, as if even her soul had taken a step back, waiting to see what would happen next. The confirmation arrived in the form of a phone call. A junior PR assistant accidentally forwarded Claudia an internal alert about an anonymous source selling photos of Klopp and Bryn at a rooftop lounge in Dubai. He had claimed to be in Berlin that weekend for a summit. The assistant apologized profusely. Claudia hung up without saying much. She didn't cry. She didn't confront him. Instead, she took a long, warm shower. Then she walked to her closet, pulled out her most comfortable robe, and poured herself a glass of wine. Red, no ice. She sat on the terrace and watched the skyline for an hour, not because she was sad, but because she wanted to remember the moment she stopped pretending she didn't see it. 2 days later, the media exploded. Tech Titan's secret romance exposed. Klopp Wood spotted with stunning intern abroad. The images were clear. His hand on Bryn's hip. Her laugh tilted up at him. Claudia's face never appeared. But the headlines didn't need her name. Everyone knew who the wife was. Still, she gave no statement, no comment, no reaction. She kept her scheduled appointments, attended every investor call, met with the Women's Initiative Board to finalize next quarter's goals. And then, one morning, while packing for a quiet retreat in Mykonos, she received a call from his lawyer. Divorce papers. Clean. Brutal. Final. He offered the Hamptons house, a generous financial settlement, asset division that leaned heavily in her favor. Claudia didn't even flinch. She accepted the property, declined the cash, and instructed her attorney to finalize it without delay. The last night they spent in the same penthouse, Claudia arrived home first. She lit a candle, not for ambiance, but for closure. She walked into their bedroom and opened every drawer that still held her things. She packed efficiently, no hesitations. Klopp arrived at 11:14 p.m. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look ashamed. He simply stood in the doorway and said nothing. Claudia turned toward him, zipped the final suitcase, and stepped forward. "If you were going to replace me," she said softly, "you could have at least picked someone who could hold a conversation without needing a dress code." He stared at her, jaw tight. "No defense?" she asked. Still, he said nothing. She nodded once. And then she left. The elevator ride down felt like floating. 12 floors, no tears. When the car arrived, the driver opened the door without asking questions. She slid in, silent. The city rolled by. She didn't look back, because there was nothing up there worth looking at anymore. Bryn was everything Klopp thought he wanted. Youthful, eager, quick with praise. She didn't challenge his decisions or demand emotional transparency. When she smiled, it was with admiration. When she asked questions, it was never to critique. For a man who built his life on efficiency and results, she was convenient affection. They spent hours together under the guise of strategy. Late dinners blurred into room service breakfasts. There were no secrets, only illusions. Bryn never asked about Claudia, never asked about the silence Klopp carried like a second skin. To her, he wasn't a man with a past. He was an empire in motion. Claudia knew about the affair before the headlines confirmed it. She didn't need evidence. The change in Klopp's energy was loud enough. His tone had grown sharper. His absence became frequent, but not apologetic. And he no longer brought his stress home because he had somewhere else to unload it. The moment she saw his arm around Bryn in those tabloid photos, there was no collapse, no reaction, because the betrayal had happened long before the photo was taken. The story made rounds for days. Claudia's name never appeared directly, but every commentator hinted at her. His longtime wife remains silent. Sources say she's in Paris. She has yet to issue a statement. She never did. She'd already said everything she needed to with her departure. The final conversation between them, if it could even be called that, took place the morning before she left for good. Klopp stood at the kitchen counter, drinking espresso like he did every morning. Claudia entered wearing soft linen pants and a blouse, her bag already packed by the door. He didn't look up right away, but when he did, his face didn't show guilt. It showed confusion. "You're really going?" She didn't answer. "You've always said marriage takes patience." "I said it takes two people willing to stay in the room when it's hard," she replied. "Not one to walk out and the other to pretend nothing happened." He set his cup down. "I never meant for it to happen this way." Claudia picked up her bag. "That's your problem, Klopp. You never mean for anything. You just choose whatever doesn't cost your pride." And then she walked out of the penthouse they had once called home. The legal process moved quickly. By the time the divorce was finalized, Claudia had already relocated to Paris. No press followed her. No gossip columnists found a scandal. She'd returned to a city she once loved, not to escape, but to remember who she was before the marriage swallowed her voice. She stayed in a modest condo. It had hardwood floors, wide windows, and no staff. She made her own tea, walked to the corner cafe every morning, answered her own emails. For the first time in years, Claudia breathed, not to survive, but to exist. Meanwhile, Klopp stayed in motion. Business continued as usual: mergers, acquisitions, media interviews, investment summits. His reputation didn't suffer. If anything, some considered him more desirable. He played the part, polished, focused, unbothered. Only behind closed doors did the cracks begin to show. Bryn stayed for another year. At first, she was the thrilling escape. Fresh energy, soft skin, no demands. But that kind of affection grows stale when it isn't rooted in anything deeper. She asked shallow questions, celebrated surface wins, had no patience for his silences or the weight that came with them. She wanted the perks, not the man. And Klopp, for all his coldness, was still human enough to notice. He ended it quietly. No drama, no apology. Bryn accepted his severance package and left the firm with a smile for the cameras and a contract that ensured her silence. 2 months later, she was dating a famous footballer and flaunting a new life on social media. Klopp didn't follow, but he saw, and each post stung more than he expected, not because he missed her, but because of what it revealed about himself. He had become replaceable. It was around this time that loneliness stopped being abstract. He returned home one night and stood in the center of the penthouse, silent, cavernous, echoing with absence. There was no perfume lingering in the hallway, no late-night laughter, no warm plate left out on the counter with a handwritten note that read, "Eat something, even if it's just this." The space felt colder than ever. Not physically, emotionally. Claudia had filled that home with presence, not decoration, not performance, just being. And without her, every corner whispered her name. He went back to the Hamptons' house once, alone. It hadn't changed much. The staff kept it clean. The view remained beautiful, but there was a stillness he couldn't shake. He walked through the room slowly, touched the edges of furniture she once picked, opened drawers that still held her handwriting on old birthday cards. He found a scarf she'd left behind in the hallway closet. Soft, gray, scented with a faint trace of jasmine. He pressed it to his face and closed his eyes. He didn't cry, but something inside him gave way. Not regret, not guilt, just loss. For months, he tried to pretend he was fine, dated a few actresses, took a duchess to a charity gala, shared a vacation home with an influencer in Ibiza. None of them lasted longer than a few weeks. They were beautiful. They were available. But they didn't ask him hard questions. They didn't challenge the version of himself he had protected for so long. They were noise. Claudia had been silence, the good kind, the kind that saw you. One night after a long day of meetings, Klopp sat in his study with a drink in hand and his phone on silent. He stared at the skyline, lights blinking across the city. His eyes weren't on the buildings. They were somewhere else, back in time, back in that restaurant where he first placed the diamond ring on the table and assumed love would follow him like everything else. He remembered the pause in her eyes, the one question she asked that he never answered. "Are you in love with me? Or just in love with the version of you that I help sustain?" Back then he didn't understand. Now he couldn't escape it. Claudia didn't announce her exit. No press release, no televised interview, no tell-all memoir. One morning, she boarded a private jet with just one suitcase and left New York airspace without turning back. No assistants, no entourage, no goodbye dinner. She arrived in Paris with a rental apartment key in her coat pocket and her wedding ring wrapped in tissue. The apartment was small by Billionaire standards. 4th floor, narrow staircase, old building with peeling brass numbers, and a front door that stuck slightly in the frame. But it was hers. She chose it herself, and for the first time in over a decade, Claudia slept in a space without security alarms, smart surveillance, or cold marble floors. She didn't speak to anyone for the first 3 days. No calls, no emails, no agenda. She cooked for herself, walked along the Seine in a wool coat, sat at cafes and sipped coffee without makeup or headlines following her every breath. And the silence didn't feel empty. The media speculated, of course. There were endless theories. Did Claudia Woods move to Italy? Has the billionaire ex-wife gone into hiding? Sources say she's dealing with emotional recovery after betrayal. None of them knew the truth, because she'd made it her business to become invisible. She wasn't healing in public. She was rebuilding in private. Paris didn't care who she had been. That helped. In New York, people stared, whispered, measured her against her husband's shadow. But here she was just another woman with a scarf pulled tight against the wind. She didn't dress up, didn't smile on cue. She walked without rushing. She paused at bookstore windows. She breathed. 6 weeks into her arrival, Claudia enrolled in a discreet business program tailored for women over 35 who wanted to pivot, not because she needed credentials, but because she needed structure. The coursework reawakened something in her, a part of her brain that had dulled beneath the layers of being a perfect wife. Late nights reading economic models, group discussions on branding identity, solo projects on creative product design. She remembered what it felt like to impress herself, not a man with quarterly goals. She reconnected with an old friend, Delphine, a former colleague from years ago, now running a boutique design studio in Montmartre. They met for tea one afternoon. Delphine looked at her long and hard before speaking. "You look thinner," she said. Claudia shrugged. "Less pressure, less steak dinners." Delphine leaned in. "But your eyes, they're louder." Claudia didn't answer right away. Then she smiled, the first real one in months. A few months passed. She started sketching again. At first it was mindless, doodles in the corners of her journals. But over time, shapes turned to concepts. Concepts became models. She found herself thinking about textures, mood, sensation, not luxury, experience. She drafted an idea, a private wellness retreat designed for women in transition, divorce, loss, rebirth. She sketched the architecture first, then the scents, then the daily experiences. Each layer of the concept came not from theory, but memory. What she wished she'd had when her world fell apart. Not a hotel, not a spa, a sanctuary. She didn't tell anyone what she was building. She registered the company under a quiet name, filed permits, hired women-run contractors, recruited therapists, chefs, stylists, yoga instructors. Every one of them had walked through fire. Every one of them knew what it meant to lose a version of themselves and still rise. Within a year, the first retreat center opened its doors in the south of France. It filled up in 3 weeks. No press coverage, no advertising, just whispers. The reviews came next, not on social media, but through letters, emails, word of mouth. Women left the retreat walking differently. Some came in broken, others came in angry, but all left with something returned to them. Voice, softness, hunger, pleasure. Claudia didn't attend every session, but when she did, she walked the halls in flats and a linen wrap. No one called her Mrs. Woods. She introduced herself as simply Claudia, and when the women found out who she was, they didn't ask about the scandal. They asked how she survived it. At night, she lit candles and opened her windows. She took long baths in rose oil and wore silk for herself, not to impress, but to remember. She didn't chase intimacy, but she didn't shy from it either. The lovers who passed through her life during those years were younger, freer, and less interested in her reputation. They kissed her with curiosity, listened when she spoke about art and architecture and touch. Some stayed a week, some an hour, but none of them stayed because she didn't ask them to. She was no longer anyone's mirror. She was her own reflection now. One evening, after walking through the vineyards outside her second retreat property, Claudia stopped at a stone bench and sat quietly. The moon hung low. The air smelled like lavender and orange peel. She closed her eyes. For the first time in a very long time, there was no grief behind her silence. No man at the center of her identity. No ache to prove her worth. Just breath. Just strength. And the memory of who she used to be, now repurposed into a woman who didn't flinch when left alone. The world forgot her. That's what they thought. But Claudia hadn't disappeared. She had refused to be watched anymore. The second retreat opened 15 months after the first. It sat on the edge of a coastal cliff in Santorini. Minimalist architecture, White stone walls, curved passageways carved into the hillside. Inside, the scent of neroli and honey greeted every guest like memory. Claudia stood at the center of the entry hall on opening day, surrounded by glass, light, and silence. She didn't speak. She didn't pose for photographs. She simply walked through each room with her eyes tracing every detail, pillows arranged with precision, candles placed beside warm towels, ceramic bowls filled with ripe fruit. Everything was intentional, because everything had come from her. This wasn't just a retreat. It was a resurrection. People began referring to her quietly as the woman who made heartbreak beautiful. She didn't trademark the title. She didn't need to. Her brand wasn't in logos or slogans. It was in the transformation of the women who came through her doors. She met a guest named Maja on a rainy Tuesday in Lisbon. Maja had flown in from Berlin, mid-divorce, mid-breakdown, mid-everything. Claudia found her crying in the steam room after the guided body therapy session. She didn't offer sympathy. She sat beside her, quietly. When Maja finally spoke, it wasn't about her husband. It wasn't about infidelity. It was about forgetting who she had once been. And Claudia understood every word, not because they had the same story, but because they had both lived through erasure. Claudia never advertised her own pain. But in the details of every program, every scent, every linen sheet chosen with care, she embedded a silent invitation. You are not broken. You are becoming. The retreats expanded. Barcelona, Amalfi, Marrakesh. Women booked months in advance. Not because they wanted luxury, because they wanted return. Return to themselves. At night, Claudia wrote letters. Not to anyone in particular, just to herself. She wrote about the ache that sometimes still caught her when she caught a scent that reminded her of New York, about the way her hands had once trembled the night she threw her wedding band into the Seine, about the moments she had doubted every decision she'd made after the divorce. But more often, she wrote about joy, the quiet kind, the kind that didn't announce itself but settled in over time, like warmth from the inside out. Her name slowly returned to headlines, not as the wife of a billionaire, but as a force in the luxury wellness industry. Journalists requested interviews. She declined most. When she did agree, she asked for no questions about her marriage. No retrospectives, she told one magazine editor. Only progress. The editor asked if she would ever remarry. Claudia smiled. I'm not interested in being chosen again. I'm interested in choosing. The power in her voice didn't come from bitterness. It came from rebuilding, brick by emotional brick. Every retreat she opened didn't just empower women. It funded local artisans, trained single mothers, created safe jobs. She didn't need press. Impact was enough. One spring afternoon, Claudia stood in the garden of her Provence location. Lavender danced in the wind. Bees hovered lazily over fresh blooms. She watched a group of women in their 40s sit barefoot on blankets, sipping tea and painting. They weren't laughing loudly. They weren't trying to impress each other. They were just together, peacefully. That was the kind of success she'd come to cherish. Not applause, stillness. Her body had changed. Her skin was softer in some places, firmer in others. Her hair now held streaks of silver at the temples, natural, not dyed. She wore clothes that moved with her rather than constrained her. She bought only what made her feel sensual, not presentable. Men noticed her, but she didn't perform for them anymore. One man, Luca, lingered longer than most. An Italian sculptor from Florence. Hands like stone and poetry, voice low and sincere. They met at an art fair in Venice. He asked her one question, "What are you building next?" It wasn't flirtation. It was curiosity. She invited him to walk the gallery with her. They spent 2 hours talking about space, design, memory, and touch. That night, he didn't ask to stay. But she told him to. And when he kissed her, it wasn't a question. It was a yes. They saw each other twice more. He never asked for more than she offered. He didn't try to shape her into softness. And when they said goodbye, it was without ache. Because not every connection needs to last to matter. Some exist to remind you of what's possible. Years passed quietly. The world kept moving. And so did Claudia. But every retreat she opened had one room reserved under her name. A reminder, not of what she lost, but of what she'd built. With silence, with pain, with her bare hands. Claudia didn't reinvent herself. She remembered herself. There was a difference. Reinvention suggested discarding the past. scrubbing down the bruised and broken parts, pretending they never existed. But Claudia wore hers, not as armor, as truth. The woman who once wore lace for a man who never noticed the detail now selected fabrics for herself. Not to entice, not to impress, but to feel. The first time she wore red silk again, it wasn't for anyone else's eyes. She stood barefoot in her Provence villa, firelight warming the walls, the dress sliding over her skin like something sacred. She moved through her bedroom with the rhythm of a woman not asking for permission to enjoy her own body. She wasn't rehearsing. She was remembering. She started swimming again, naked, under moonlight. Not for show, for freedom. The pool behind the estate stretched toward the olive groves, bathed in quiet and steam. Claudia would wade in just before midnight, letting the water wrap her limbs in silence. She would float on her back, eyes on the stars. Sometimes she whispered the names of all the versions of herself she had once been. Sometimes she said nothing at all. She explored pleasure differently now, slower, not just physical, intellectual, emotional, spatial. A glance, a scent, a line of poetry read aloud in the late hours of the night. She became fascinated by the way desire lived in stillness, how real hunger had nothing to do with desperation and everything to do with being fully present. Her lovers were occasional, carefully chosen, never out of need. They were men who could appreciate the way she ran her empire barefoot on warm tiles, who didn't flinch when she corrected them, who didn't treat her age like a hurdle or her silence like emptiness. She didn't seek validation. She offered invitation, only to those who knew the difference. One of them, Armand, was a vineyard keeper from Bordeaux. He came to her estate to deliver a wine shipment. They met over a misplaced crate of bottles. He spoke softly, with hands stained by labor, his shirt open at the collar, sweat clinging to his temples. He didn't flirt. He observed. "You walk like someone who's stopped waiting to be noticed," he said. She tilted her head. "Should I take that as a compliment?" He nodded once. "It's the highest one I can give." They spent a week together, not in fever, not in chaos, in awareness. He cooked. She watched. She wrote. He asked questions. They danced to no music, fingertips grazing glass as they moved through the kitchen at night. When they made love, it wasn't loud. It was slow, measured, deliberate. She led, not because she needed to be dominant, but because she wanted to know what it felt like to be heard in every touch. And he followed, not with passivity, but with attention. When he left, there were no promises, just a bottle of wine placed gently on her nightstand. No note, just understanding. Claudia didn't grieve these partings. She didn't assign them titles like heartbreak or closure. She understood their function. They weren't trials or placeholders. They were moments. Moments where she rediscovered the edges of her own longing and understood her worth not as something to be earned, but as something that already was. She stood in the mirror one morning, no makeup, hair loose, robe undone, and ran her fingers across the softness of her stomach. She didn't wish it were flatter. She didn't wish to rewind time. Her body wasn't a memory of youth. It was a living archive. Every curve, every line, every place where skin folded was evidence of life fully lived. She lifted her chin and smiled, not at beauty, at certainty. In the evenings, she began writing again, not just letters, but essays, observations, poetry. She wrote about touch, about solitude, about how women are often taught to be silent in their joy, careful in their passion. She published anonymously through a small digital platform focused on feminine philosophy. The response was quiet but powerful. Strangers sent letters. Women thanked her for naming things they didn't know how to say. Men asked for more. She gave only what she wanted to, never what was expected. By year 6, Claudia's name had become more than a whispered success. She was featured in international business journals, not for being someone's ex-wife, but for redefining post-divorce empowerment through sensory rehabilitation, retreats, fragrance lines, a curated travel experience called Unearthed, a journey for women over 40 seeking sensual reconnection with themselves through texture, language, cuisine, and movement. Her work wasn't just admired, it was studied. And yet, despite it all, she remained anchored. She still walked alone in the garden before dawn, still brewed her own tea, still pressed wild herbs into soap with her hands. Success didn't inflate her. It refined her. On her birthday, she spent the entire day by herself. No calls, no guests. She bathed in milk and honey, read old love letters she'd once written to no one, and fell asleep with the windows open and the scent of rosemary in the air. She woke up at midnight, rolled onto her side, and whispered to the dark, "You are not the version of me that needed saving." She was no longer waiting for a man to complete her. She had become the kind of woman a man would kneel for without being asked. Klopp Woods built his empire on vision and pressure. He understood how to turn hesitation into dominance, how to sniff out weakness in a competitor's offer, and how to keep emotion out of the boardroom. His name on a project guaranteed investor confidence. His face on a press release shifted stock prices. He didn't smile in photos. He didn't indulge interviews unless the audience was top-tier finance. He didn't explain. People respected that, until they didn't. 6 years had passed since Claudia left. In that time, Klopp's company had tripled in valuation. 3 new divisions, a data security subsidiary, a digital real estate investment branch, multiple international headquarters. From a distance, everything looked intact, steady, even growing. But from within, the cracks were not only forming, they were spreading. His executive team changed more frequently now. Those who used to stay for years left after 12 months. Some didn't make it past their onboarding. His meetings had become colder, shorter. There were fewer jokes, no moments of warmth. Decisions were faster, but lacked the pulse they once had when Claudia was behind the scenes guiding strategy from the shadows. He'd never admit it, but she'd been the human rhythm to his mechanical drive. Now, without her, things still moved forward, but the motion lacked soul. He dated, of course. A public figure couldn't remain alone for long without inviting speculation. There was a steady cycle of polished, camera-ready women on his arm, actresses with glowing smiles, gallery curators, lifestyle consultants. None of them lasted. They attended his galas, posed for photos, whispered into his ear at launch events. But none of them stayed past the after-party. He didn't bring them to his real life, to the late nights in the study, to the balcony where he drank in silence, to the bedroom that no longer felt like a place for intimacy. He didn't allow anyone in, because no one knew how to walk in barefoot like she did. He kept the penthouse but rarely slept in the master suite. He claimed it was due to renovations. The truth was less curated. Her scent still lived in the fabric of the curtains. Her voice echoed off the marble bathroom walls. The closet felt haunted by her restraint, how she took only what she needed when she left, and not a thing more. Every object she didn't take became an indictment. He found her earring once, tucked in the corner of a drawer. He stared at it for hours. The silence in his home was no longer a luxury. It was a mirror. Every sound he didn't hear reminded him of her absence. The clink of a teaspoon on porcelain, the slow tap of her heels on the hallway, the sound of her voice in the next room, low, deliberate, always steady. Even his coffee tasted different. She used to grind the beans fresh when she knew he had a long day. He now relied on machine settings. Everything worked. Nothing satisfied. Business success didn't make up for the void. No award, merger, or conference filled the room the way Claudia once did, without effort, without announcement. She had made their world feel intimate, even when it spanned cities. Now, no matter where he traveled, the emptiness followed. Singapore, Dubai, Sao Paulo, private jets, 5-star suites, champagne on ice, and still, he found himself returning to the same thought. She's not here. One night he stood at the center of a gala, held in his honor, 10 years of expansion, global recognition, philanthropic influence. He wore the suit Claudia once helped him select, tailored to perfection. The room was filled with power. People laughed, toasted, whispered about deals, about futures, about him. But all he could think about was a moment from years ago. Claudia, in their kitchen, barefoot, stirring tea. She wasn't trying to impress. She was just present, and he hadn't understood the value of presence until it was gone. In private moments, the memory of her voice would surface without warning. Not the glamorous voice she used for events. The quiet one. The one she used when reminding him to sleep, to eat, to stop working. He'd ignored it then. Now, he longed for it more than he could admit. He once tried to recreate it, hired a consultant to humanize his brand, reintroduce warmth into his executive environment, bring more emotional intelligence to the leadership floor. It failed, because Claudia hadn't operated from a playbook. She knew people. She listened. She adjusted. She didn't need to manipulate. Her presence changed the temperature of a room. He realized, far too late, that people didn't just stay in his company because of him. They stayed because of her. His therapist once asked him, "Do you miss your wife?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "She wasn't just my wife." The therapist waited. He clarified, "She was the part of me I never developed." After a business summit in Copenhagen, he stayed an extra night. Not for meetings, for the quiet. He walked the streets with a scarf wrapped around his collar, breathing in the late autumn air. He passed a florist. A woman walked out holding white lilies and laughing into her phone. Her hair caught the wind the same way Claudia's used to. For half a second, he froze. Then she turned, and the spell broke. But the ache didn't. He didn't regret building his empire. He regretted doing it alone. And worse, realizing that he never had to. Claudia had never asked to compete with his ambition. She only ever asked to belong within it. And he hadn't made room. Now, in boardrooms that echoed with applause, in towers he owned outright, in penthouses that overlooked cities most people dreamed of visiting, he walked alone. He had everything. Except the woman who once asked, "Are you in love with me, or just in love with the version of yourself that I help sustain?" And now, all these years later, he finally had the answer. Klopp Woods could have anyone. That wasn't arrogance. It was observation. The invitations came often, slipped into cocktail napkins, whispered through assistants, emailed, discreetly by women who understood exactly what kind of man he was and didn't care. But it never mattered how beautiful they were, how sharp their heels, how practiced their gaze. There was a gap between their bodies and his soul. And the longer he chased pleasure, the more obvious that gap became. He met Ava in Dubai. She was smart, quick-tongued, carried herself like someone raised among wealth and used to being listened to. Their first dinner was effortless. She laughed at his jokes, told stories in perfect rhythm, touched his hand without hesitation. That night, they ended up in his suite. Everything was polished, mutually understood. But when it was over, she rolled away and went straight to her phone. He lay there beside her, eyes open, not from satisfaction, but from clarity. She had taken what she needed. So had he, and nothing lingered. Then there was Karina in Berlin, an art curator, elegant, curious, emotionally fluent. She asked about his childhood, his first company, his regrets. He answered in measured sentences. She listened like she was taking notes for a future she assumed would include him. She made him breakfast the next morning, soft eggs, warm rye bread, chamomile tea. She smiled when he said goodbye, standing at the door in her robe. He never called her again. Not because she did anything wrong, but because her presence reminded him of what he'd once had, and ruined. The women changed. Their intentions didn't. Some wanted access. Some wanted comfort. Some wanted the story. None of them wanted the silence between his sentences, the parts that weren't marketable, the parts only Claudia ever sat through without trying to fill. He tried therapy again. A different therapist this time, younger, direct. They spoke in metaphors Klopp didn't like, but tolerated. One day the therapist asked him to describe what intimacy meant to him. Klopp didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, he said, "She once knew when to speak and when not to." That's it. He found himself increasingly distracted. In meetings, he drifted. At events, he scanned the crowd, always hoping, irrationally, to catch a familiar figure standing in the back. He dreamed of her. Not always clearly. Sometimes it was just her hand, reaching for a doorknob, or the back of her head, walking away. Other times he woke up with her name in his mouth, heart racing. It wasn't lust. It was ache. He traveled to Venice in spring, tried to relax, rented a villa overlooking the canal. His assistant booked a private chef. A violinist played on the balcony one evening. He sat with a glass of wine and watched the reflection of the moon on the water. It was beautiful, but he didn't feel anything. There were messages from past lovers, brief, polite. Ava asked if he'd be in Paris soon. Karina forwarded an article on architecture with a wink. Others just sent photos of sunsets or boats or rooftop bars. He replied to none. He didn't have the energy to pretend connection where there was only function. One woman came close. Delilah, a venture capitalist from Barcelona. Sharp, ruthless in business, surprisingly warm in private. She didn't chase, She matched his pace and then surpassed it. They shared weeks of passion, long drives, morning coffee, but even she noticed something missing. "You're present," she said one morning, sliding her fingers down his chest, but only halfway. He nodded. "I know." She kissed him gently. "You're in love with a ghost." He didn't argue, because she was right. It was easy to have lovers. It was impossible to have intimacy, because he no longer trusted what he gave, and he no longer believed he deserved what Claudia once offered without condition. He began to visit places that reminded him of her. Not to find her, to feel her. The wine bar in Paris, where she once ordered a bottle he said was too sweet. The bookstore in Amsterdam, where she spent 3 hours comparing translations of Neruda poems. The hotel in Tokyo, where she watched the sunrise in silence after a flight delay turned into an unexpected night of connection. Each place was the same. He wasn't. At one point, he considered writing her. But what would he say? "I see you in every woman who doesn't know how to stay. I feel your breath in rooms you've never entered. I've spent years building futures that feel like museums, beautiful, silent, dead." No letter could carry the weight of what he needed to say, and even if it could, he wasn't sure she'd read it. He once overheard 2 junior partners talking in the lounge outside his office. They were young, early 30s. One said, "I'd give anything to have what Klopp Woods has." The other replied, "You mean the company or the loneliness?" They laughed, but he didn't, because neither of them were wrong. In his private journal, tucked behind a drawer only he opened, he wrote 6 words. "I was too proud to stay soft." That was the truth. Every woman who came after Claudia touched his body. Not one touched his mind. Not one reached the part of him that still believed softness was a risk he couldn't afford. But Claudia? She had reached it without trying. She had spoken its language without translation. Klopp kept the ring, not the one he wore during the marriage. He threw that into the Thames the night the divorce was finalized. But the one he gave her, emerald cut, sharp lines, cold beauty, still flawless. It sat in a locked drawer in his study, tucked between old contracts and international property deeds. He told himself he kept it for legal reasons, but he never moved it. And every year, without planning to, he opened the drawer and stared at it on the same night, May 17th, the date he proposed. He no longer attended award ceremonies. He sent executives in his place. He avoided press features that used words like legacy or legend. They felt hollow. What was the point of building a legacy when the only person who saw him clearly had walked away before it was complete? His reflection had changed, lines deeper around the mouth, eyes no longer wide with calculation, but narrowed by time. He still wore tailored suits, still had assistants who adjusted his schedule to the second, still arrived to meetings with precision and left with profit. But there was something different about his posture now, a weight that couldn't be offloaded, a drag behind the confidence. His home was quiet, by design. He'd upgraded, moved twice, but every layout felt the same. Open, impressive, empty. He installed floor-to-ceiling windows, but they only reminded him that he didn't care about the view anymore, not without her voice behind him, murmuring thoughts about color palettes and light angles. She had always noticed things he didn't. She once said, "You love achievement, but you don't know how to sit in joy." He had brushed her off. Now, he couldn't sit in either. He rarely touched alcohol these days, not because of health, because of memory. Wine reminded him of Claudia's lips stained deep red after sipping from crystal glasses. Champagne reminded him of her toast at his IPO celebration, the only speech that didn't mention money, just gratitude. Scotch reminded him of the night she told him she was no longer willing to be the background character in his highlight reel. He still remembered the sound of her heels walking away from that conversation, measured, certain, final. One evening, he received a parcel, no return address. Inside, a photograph, black and white, a boy, about 12, standing in front of a vineyard, holding a camera, sharp cheekbones, wide-set eyes, straight mouth. At first, Klopp thought it was a mistake. Then he saw the note beneath it. One sentence. "Not everything you leave behind disappears." No signature. He stared at the photo for an hour. Then he pulled out a picture of himself at 12. Same jaw, same stare. He didn't move for a long time. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the library, lights off, the photo in one hand, whiskey untouched in the other. He thought about Claudia. Not just her body, her stillness, her restraint, her refusal to let him define her once he stopped choosing her. He had believed, foolishly, that her departure was about pride. Now he saw the truth. She left to protect what remained of herself. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shocked. He was hollow, a kind of quiet that didn't echo. The scar wasn't fresh, but it was permanent. The next morning, he went to his closet and pulled out an old box. Inside, papers, notes, receipts, small tokens of a life they once shared. He opened her old letters. Not love letters. Claudia didn't write that way. They were notes about schedules, travel plans, reminders to rest. He used to toss them aside. Now he read every one like scripture. One of them read, "If I ever walk away, it won't be sudden. It'll be the final step in 1,000 days of watching you drift farther out of reach." He folded it and placed it back into the envelope. He couldn't say he wasn't warned. The photo of the boy stayed on his desk for a week. He didn't tell anyone about it. Not his lawyer. Not his team. He wanted to reach out. But how do you ask to enter the life of a child you abandoned before knowing he existed? How do you say, "I was selfish. I was blind. I was not ready to be anything more than what the world applauded"? He took a drive to the Hamptons. The house was exactly as it had been left. Unlived in, yet perfect. The sheets in the guest room still folded. The kitchen still spotless. He sat on the edge of the bed they used to share. Not to reminisce. To confess. Out loud to an empty room, he said, "I failed her." Then again, more quietly, "I failed myself." He closed his eyes and pictured Claudia's face. Not the angry version. The steady one. The woman who once asked him, "Do you know what peace sounds like? It sounds like me loving you, even when you forget how to love me back." He remembered shrugging her off then. Now, he could barely breathe through it. There was no fixing what was broken. Not fully. But maybe, just maybe, there was still time to understand it. To hold it gently. To become something better because of it. He pulled out a notepad. Tore a fresh page. Wrote only 3 words. "I'm still learning." Then folded it. No envelope. No address. Just the truth, scribbled with trembling hands. It arrived on a Tuesday. No courier, no signature required. Just a discreet ivory envelope slipped beneath the door of Klopp's private office. His assistant hadn't seen who delivered it. The security cameras showed no clear footage, but there it was. Heavy cardstock. Gold foil trim. Thick as intention. He turned it over once. No return name. Just a wax seal with a crescent moon pressed into the center. He didn't open it right away. He stared at it for 5 minutes, and then, slowly, broke the seal. Inside was a single card. Simple. Elegant. "You are cordially invited to an exclusive weekend at Maison de Lune, Provence. Your presence is expected. Please reply required. Claudia." He read it twice. Then, a 3rd time. His chest tightened, though he wouldn't call it panic. It wasn't fear either. It was something stranger. Like recognition in a language you forgot you once spoke. Maison de Lune. He'd heard whispers about it in business circles. A private estate in Provence, owned by a woman known for redefining feminine luxury. The location was so secretive it didn't show up on property registries. No official press coverage. No publicized photos. Only testimonials from clients with last names that rarely appeared in tabloids. He hadn't known it was Claudia's. Until now. He didn't tell anyone about the invitation. Not his board. Not his assistant. Not even his therapist. He cleared his weekend schedule with a vague excuse and booked a quiet jet under an old alias he hadn't used since before Claudia. He didn't pack much. Just black suits. White shirts. No ties. He didn't know what she wanted from him. But he knew what he owed her. Presence. The car met him on a narrow airstrip just outside Marseille. Driver said nothing. Offered sparkling water and a sealed itinerary folder. Klopp didn't open it. He looked out the window instead as the landscape shifted. Vineyards, stone walls, lavender fields bending under late summer wind. After nearly an hour, the road curved into a tree-lined gravel path, each branch above twisting like old hands clasping at the sky. Then, suddenly, Maison de Lune. It rose like a secret well-kept. Modern and ancient, all at once. Arched terraces, soft stone, columns wrapped in flowering vines, sculptures framed in glass. It didn't scream wealth. It whispered command. Claudia stood on the front steps when the car pulled in. She wore ivory silk that moved with her body, not against it. Her hair was longer now, darker, looser. No jewelry, no smile, just presence. "Mr. Woods," she said evenly as he stepped out. He hated how his throat tightened at the sound of her voice. "Thank you for coming." He nodded. "You didn't leave much room to decline." Her mouth curved slightly, too small to be called a smile, too knowing to be called anything else. "If you'd wanted to decline, you wouldn't have gotten on the plane." She turned without another word and walked up the steps. He followed. Inside, the estate was nothing like the homes he'd known. It breathed. Natural lights spilled from skylights. Scented air drifted from unseen vents, notes of sandalwood and something softer like honey or memory. Women moved through the halls, none of them rushing, none of them glancing twice at him. It was a different kind of empire, not built on intimidation, but precision. Claudia led him to a private suite. Cream walls, linen drapes, a terrace overlooking the vineyard. He dropped his bag on the chair and turned to her. "This isn't about revenge," he said. "No," she replied calmly. "It's not." "Then what is it?" Her eyes didn't blink. Closure. The silence between them thickened. She stepped forward, not quite close, but enough that he could smell the warmth of her skin. "You've built companies, weathered losses, acquired nations practically. But the one thing you never did," she tilted her head, "was look back at what you destroyed." He didn't respond, not because he disagreed, but because he couldn't pretend anymore. Later, she left him alone. He sat on the terrace, hands resting on his knees, the vineyard below lit by golden dusk. The staff brought dinner, simple, elegant, salmon, figs, fresh bread. He ate slowly, watching the sky change color. She didn't reappear. No explanation, no itinerary. Just space and time. The next morning, he joined a breakfast circle on the east lawn. Claudia was already there, speaking softly with a group of guests, artists, designers, one retired opera singer. She didn't introduce him. He didn't mind. She belonged to this world now, and he was only passing through. Throughout the day, he watched her work. She didn't command attention. She didn't perform. She moved. She listened. She corrected details with a glance, guided staff with a nod, soothed conflict with no raised voice. She was a queen, but not in the way men usually define it. She didn't need a crown. She carried command in her silence. That night, he found her in the garden. She was trimming herbs, bare hands, dirt under her nails, sleeves rolled. He paused a few feet away. "You planned all this." "I invited you." "Same thing." She wiped her hands on a towel and looked at him. "You came because you still think there's something to win." He didn't argue, because that used to be true. But now, he wasn't sure. She stepped closer. "Why are you really here, Klopp?" He opened his mouth, closed it again, and then, with a voice lower than he expected from himself, he said, "I couldn't carry it anymore. The absence." She studied him for a long time, then turned back to the herbs. "Good," she said softly. "Then you're finally ready to listen." The days at Maison de Lune didn't follow clocks. There were no bells, no reminders, no forced activities, just rhythm. Sunlight spilled in slowly every morning, creeping across stone floors and wrapping its way around the arches of the courtyard. The guests moved like dancers without choreography, gliding from balconies to gardens, dipping in and out of rooms filled with oils, books, textures, and silence. Klopp didn't know what to do with stillness. His world had been built on precision, but here it dissolved. He tried to structure his mornings, wake at 6, light jog, coffee, emails. By day 2, his phone was locked away by the concierge. "No screens in the inner estate," they told him gently. "House policy." At first, it felt like exile. Then it started to feel like mercy. Claudia was nowhere and everywhere. She didn't announce herself. She glided into spaces, spoke briefly with the chef, offered quiet notes to a florist arranging the centerpieces, paused to place a shawl over a guest's shoulders as a breeze passed through the corridor. She didn't avoid Klopp, but she didn't linger either. She acknowledged him like she acknowledged the olive trees. Present, observed, unbothered. He followed her once, not like a man tracking a lover, but like a student trying to understand his teacher's pace. She moved into a meditation dome at the back of the property. sunken into a slope of cypress trees, covered in clay and aged wood. He watched from outside. Through the glass wall, she knelt with 4 women in a half-circle. Each woman held a bowl. Claudia touched each bowl with 2 fingers, then stepped back. She wasn't leading. She was creating space. It hit him all at once. She wasn't healing from something anymore. She had healed. And now, she was a vessel for others. That night, dinner was served in the vineyard. A long wooden table, no name cards, no agenda. Just conversation, lanterns swaying in the soft wind, and plates filled with roasted vegetables, sea bass, handmade pasta, local wine. Claudia sat at the opposite end of the table, barefoot, hair undone, laughing with a designer from Milan. Klopp sat between 2 entrepreneurs from Ghana. They asked about his companies. He answered politely, but his attention never drifted far from the woman at the far end. She had built something impossible, not just an empire, a sanctuary. Without him, when the dinner ended, most guests filtered away in pairs or alone. He remained. Claudia stood slowly, wineglass in hand, and walked toward him. She didn't sit. "You've been watching," she said. He nodded. "I needed to see it." "What did you see?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, "A world that doesn't need me." She tilted her head. "Why would it?" That landed deeper than he expected, but it didn't wound. It cleared something. "You've changed," he said finally. "No," she replied. "I arrived." The stars above the vineyard stretched wide. He looked up, then back at her. "You invited me here for closure." "Yes." "Closure for what? The divorce? The betrayal?" "No," she said. "Closure for the story you told yourself, that I existed to orbit around your ambition." Her voice was calm, unemotional, surgical. He stood, facing her. "Then why invite me at all?" She studied him for a long time, to see if you're capable of standing still long enough to understand what you lost. His jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. Claudia stepped closer, not touching, not threatening. "I built all of this," she whispered, "from the ashes of a woman you once mistook for quiet." She walked away before he could answer. He didn't follow. He sat back down at the empty table, surrounded by half-drunk glasses and crumpled napkins. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do next. He spent the next morning in the rose garden. No one joined him, which was just as well. He needed time, not to plan, to sit. In the afternoon, Claudia found him. She wore a loose white blouse, no makeup, a woven bracelet around her wrist. "Walk with me," she said. He stood without hesitation. They followed a dirt path down the hill, past the olive groves and toward a grove of cypress trees. For several minutes, no one spoke. Then she said, "You always filled silence with control." He looked at her, unsure. She continued, "But silence is where truth settles." He nodded, not because he understood, but because he wanted to. At the edge of the grove, she stopped. "This is where I buried my wedding ring." He glanced down at the dirt. "No marker? I don't need one. Why here?" She inhaled. "Because this is where I realized that ending something doesn't mean I failed. It means I woke up." He looked away, jaw tightening. "I was never taught how to hold anything I didn't win, and I was never interested in being won." They stood in the quiet for a while longer. Then she turned back toward the house. But before leaving him behind, she said softly, "You came here to understand what you lost." She looked him in the eye. "But that's not enough." He frowned. "Then what is?" Her voice didn't falter. "To understand what you cost." The final dinner was private, just the 2 of them. No staff, no guests, no lingering movement in the halls. The dining room was smaller than the others in the estate. Rounded walls, low light, a single table with place settings for 2. A bottle of red had already been uncorked. The silence between them was no longer tense. It was full, like breath held before a confession. Claudia poured for both of them. She didn't wear silk tonight. She wore black linen, barefoot, hair in a loose knot. Klopp, for once, felt underdressed in his usual black suit, not because she looked more powerful, because she looked more real. The first course arrived, carried in by a silent server who exited without speaking. Her hands brushed the edge of her wine glass. "Do you know why I chose this room?" she asked. He shook his head. "This was where I sat after the first retreat opened, alone. After the last guest had gone, I drank this same wine, ate this same dish, and I told myself that healing was not about forgetting. It was about naming what hurt. She took a sip, and then reclaiming the appetite I had given to someone else's ambition. He swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. She didn't wait for him. Every day, I poured myself into you, into your systems, your expectations, your image, and I did it willingly. I was never forced. Her gaze was level. I disappeared by choice. And when I finally realized that, it broke me. Klopp leaned forward slightly. I didn't know how to be anything else. I'm not blaming you, she said. I didn't say you were. You're defending yourself. He paused, then sat back. She was right. The second course came, slow-roasted sea bass with lemon thyme. He touched his fork, but didn't eat. She did. She savored each bite without apology. He watched. You always talked about legacy, she said between mouthfuls. You wanted buildings, foundations, press, generational wealth. She set her fork down. But I was the only thing you had that could have made all of it mean something. He felt the weight of that land on him. Not like a blow, like gravity. I see it now, he said. She looked at him. Do you feel it? Yes. Where? He hesitated. Then, softly in my chest. Then you're not too far gone. For a while, they didn't speak. The final course came. Figs soaked in honey, crushed almonds, shaved chocolate. She took one bite. He didn't. I spent years pretending I didn't love you anymore, she said, staring at her plate. Tried to rewrite the memories. Tried to turn you into a villain so I wouldn't miss you. She met his eyes. But the truth is, I never stopped loving you. He blinked. She added, I just stopped needing you. He reached for his glass, then stopped. I never found you in anyone else. I didn't leave so you could go looking for me, she said calmly. I know. Did you? He looked down. I do now. Claudia stood and walked toward the terrace doors. She opened them, letting in the sound of night insects and the faint rustle of vines. He rose and followed, stopping a step behind her. You once asked me, she said, if I could ever love you again. He hadn't remembered saying it aloud, but the weight of it now made his lungs feel tight. She turned to face him. I could. Hope flared in his chest. But not as the man you were. It flickered. Not even as the man you are then. But maybe as the man you're still becoming. He stepped closer. Not to touch, just to hear better. And what would that man need to be? He asked. She tilted her head. Quiet, not silent, quiet. He waited. Soft without apology, strong without control, present without a script. He closed his eyes briefly. She looked at him like she once had. Not like a wife, like a mirror. If I do, it won't be for you. He nodded. It'll be for the boy. His breath caught. She didn't pause. For the man he needs, not the man you used to be. He opened his mouth, but she stopped him. No promises, she said. No declarations. Just this moment. She extended her hand. Can you stand in it without running? He took her hand. Not like a businessman sealing a deal. Like a man learning how to hold something delicate. The wind shifted. She stepped beside him, their shoulders aligned, facing the vineyard together. You never noticed how the grapes ripen, she said. He shook his head. No, they don't need shoulders aligned, facing the vineyard together. You never noticed how the grapes ripen, she said. He shook his head. No, they don't need to be forced, she whispered. They just need the right environment. They stood like that for a long time, saying nothing, not returning, not rushing, just standing, side by side, in the silence he had once feared, now learning how to make room inside it. The night after their conversation on the terrace, Claudia hosted a dinner, not for him, for them. Artists, economists, designers, scientists. A few familiar faces Klopp recognized from Forbes lists, others he'd never heard of, but who spoke with the kind of certainty that could only come from lived brilliance. The dining hall was long, glass-paneled, surrounded by vines coiling upward like time itself. There were no introductions made for him. Claudia didn't seat him beside her. She placed him 3 chairs down, between a South African textile historian and a woman who'd just completed a 3-year solo sail across the Atlantic. He sat still, quiet, absorbing. Nobody cared that he was a billionaire. Nobody asked about market value. They were talking about ecosystems, identity, the architecture of touch, the science of scent. He didn't speak for half an hour. No one noticed. And for the first time in years, that felt right. Claudia moved between conversations with effortless gravity, not performance, not pretense, precision. When she laughed, it was earned. When she paused, others followed. She didn't cling to attention. She granted it. And in that room, full of thinkers and feelers and survivors, she glowed in a way Klopp had never truly witnessed. Because back then, he hadn't known how to see her. By dessert, he'd learned more in silence than he ever had from years of executive summits. And she never once looked his way, not out of cruelty, but because he wasn't the center anymore. After the guests left, Claudia stayed behind to collect plates. She didn't summon staff. She didn't ask for help. She moved with rhythm, stacking empty glasses, brushing crumbs from linen with slow, circular motions. Klopp stood in the doorway, watching, then stepped forward. He took a plate from her hand and began gathering others. No words, just motion. She allowed it, didn't thank him, didn't instruct him, just worked, side by side. They cleaned in near silence. The room had been reset in minutes. When she finally looked at him, there was no expectation in her gaze, only acknowledgement. "I'm staying in the East Wing tonight," she said. He nodded. "I know." She turned to go, then paused. "You used to expect that I'd follow you. I remember. You used to believe I'd always forgive you." "I did. You used to think sex was a currency." He took a breath. "And now," she studied him, "now I wonder if you've ever truly been touched." She disappeared into the hallway. He didn't follow, not because he didn't want to, but because for the first time in his life, he understood that wanting wasn't enough. Midnight passed slowly. He sat on the edge of the bed in the guest suite, eyes tracing the shadows across the ceiling. He didn't crave sleep. He craved permission, not from her, from himself, to feel everything he had kept buried, to admit the moments when he had used love like leverage, to acknowledge how often he mistook loyalty for servitude, and to accept that the woman who once begged for his attention no longer needed it to breathe. He woke before sunrise, showered, dressed in a plain white shirt and cotton trousers someone had placed in the closet, made tea, and sat on the edge of the terrace watching the sky shift into amber. At 6:43 a.m., she joined him, not with ceremony, just presence. She didn't speak at first. She sipped from her own mug, chamomile, no sugar. Then, finally, "Why didn't you follow me?" He turned to her. "I didn't deserve to." She looked at him a long while. "You're right." She sipped again. "But you're also learning." They didn't need to dissect the dinner, or the silence, or the new balance of power. Because something unspoken had already settled, Claudia no longer needed to be chosen. And Klopp had stopped trying to control what he hadn't earned. They walked through the garden later that morning, barefoot, no agenda, just scent and soil. She picked a fig from a tree and offered him half. He took it, chewed slowly. It was the sweetest thing he'd tasted in years. "You're different," she said quietly. He glanced over. "Not fixed," she clarified. "Just slower. I don't want to be the man I was. That man only took." "I see that now." She nodded. He added, "And you?" She raised a brow. "You're not the woman I left." "No," she said. "That woman's gone." He nodded, a beat behind. "I miss her." Claudia stopped walking. "You never knew her." That landed hard. But it was true. He never saw her pain, only her productivity. They reached the edge of the path. She turned to him. "There's nothing left to beg for." "I know. There's nothing to win." "I'm not here to win." "Then why are you still here?" He looked her in the eye. To witness, the corners of her mouth lifted. Slight, subtle, enough. That night, they didn't make love. They didn't even touch. They sat on the floor of her study, books spread around them, feet brushing occasionally, heads tipped, in quiet dialogue about Neruda and Sappho and something a French philosopher once said about longing. She handed him a passage to read. He read it aloud, not to impress, to feel it in his mouth. When he finished, she placed her hand over his heart. "You're starting to understand," she said, not as praise, as truth, and for the first time in his life, Clop Woods didn't feel like a conqueror. He felt like a man finally worthy of the softness he had once feared. The courtyard at night was different. It didn't demand silence. It invited tension. Stone columns framed the space, draped in flowering vines. The floor was warm from the heat of the day. Lanterns flickered in low corners, their flames swaying with the breeze, casting shifting shadows against the walls. Claudia stood barefoot on the mosaic tiles, a thin shawl falling from one shoulder. Clop had been passing through, returning from the meditation dome. He stopped at the sight of her, caught mid-step. She didn't turn to him right away. She let the silence hold. "You never used to knock," she said finally, her voice low, nearly lost in the wind. He stepped closer, slowly. "I never knew how," he answered. She turned now, her expression unreadable, yet charged. "You were always the one opening doors you never intended to stay behind." He took another step. She studied him. "Now you ask permission." Her hair was loose tonight. No makeup, no performance, just skin, breath, and restraint. He moved to stand before her, careful not to crowd. She didn't step back, but she didn't reach for him either. "Tell me something true," she said. He met her eyes. "I still dream about your voice." She exhaled, soft but sharp. "What does it say in your dreams?" He didn't blink. "It asks if I'm ready to stop leading and start listening." She stepped around him, slow, circling. "Do you know why I brought you here?" "I thought I did." "I think I was wrong." She stopped behind him. "Are you still trying to earn something from me, Clop?" "No." "Are you waiting to be forgiven?" "No." She came to his side. "Then why are you trembling?" He glanced down at his hands. He hadn't realized they were. Claudia stepped in front of him, face close enough he could feel her breath. Her hand rose, fingers trailing the line of his jaw. "You built entire kingdoms with these hands," she whispered. He nodded once. "And yet not once did you touch me like I was something to be learned." His lips parted, but no sound came. Her hand moved to his chest. "Do you know what it means to be wanted without being taken?" His voice barely surfaced. "No." She pressed her palm flat against his heart. "Then tonight, you don't speak." His breath hitched. "You don't lead." He nodded. "You receive." Claudia guided him backward, step by step, until his back touched the warm courtyard wall. She didn't rush. Every motion measured, not to tease, but to teach. She leaned in, kissed him. Once, then pulled back. He didn't chase. Her fingers undid the first button of his shirt, then another, slowly, watching him. He stayed still. She ran her mouth along the column of his throat, not with hunger, but with instruction. She dropped to her knees, not in worship, in power. He inhaled sharply. Her hands undid his belt, and this time she looked up. "Let go," she said. His head fell back, and when she took him into her mouth, it wasn't to please. It was to reclaim. He groaned her name, not as a plea, as a confession. She didn't stop. She didn't slow. When he spilled into her mouth, she swallowed every ounce without breaking eye contact, then rose. He was breathless, unsteady, undone. She stepped closer. "Now you understand," she said, voice low and steady. "What?" "What it feels like to be held without needing to perform." He reached for her waist. She stopped his hand. "Not yet." His brows furrowed. She leaned in, brushing her lips against his. "You haven't earned the right to touch me tonight." His throat tightened. She pulled back, eyes dark, jaw set. "You just learned surrender." He nodded. "And tomorrow," she added, turning from him, "we begin something new." She walked away. He didn't follow. He stood there, half-dressed, trembling from something deeper than climax. Not humiliation, not rejection. Release. For the first time in his life, Clop Woods had been desired without control, and it was the most powerful moment he'd ever survived. The night air hung heavy with orange blossom and ashwood. Somewhere in the distance, a cello played softly, slow, dissonant, unraveling itself into silence. Clop stepped into the open-air spa terrace barefoot. Stone tiles beneath him were warm from the day's heat, now cooling under moonlight. Steam rose lazily from the still water of the central pool. Claudia stood at the edge, wrapped in a silk robe the color of ash. She didn't look at him. She didn't have to. He paused, his body already remembering the rules. No assumptions, no commands, no performance, just presence. She slipped the robe from her shoulders. It fell in silence. The moon hit her spine in a curve of silver. She walked toward the pool and stepped in, inch by inch, the water barely rippling as she moved. When she reached the center, she turned, water at her waist, her arms extended along the edge of the pool. And then, her eyes lifted to meet his. An invitation, but not permission. He would have to ask. Klopp removed his shirt first, then his pants, then his hesitation. He stepped into the pool slowly. The heat wrapped him like breath. Every step toward her felt earned, not through effort, through restraint. She met him halfway, but didn't touch. Instead, she moved behind him, hands on his shoulders, palms firm, commanding. She guided him down, not into the water, but onto the flat, smooth edge beside the pool. He lay back, naked under the stars, breathing like a man about to be rewritten. Claudia climbed over him, one knee at a time, her skin dripping from the pool, glistening like oil on fire. She hovered above him, not teasing, studying. "You used to touch me like I was a reward," she said. He nodded. "I'm not a reward." He swallowed. "I know." Her hand came down, slow, deliberate, pressing to his chest. "You touch me now like I'm a truth." He looked up at her. "You are." She sank onto him in one motion. No flourish, no gasp, just gravity. Her breath caught. His eyes fluttered closed. She leaned in, her lips brushing his ear. "Don't close your eyes." He obeyed. She moved slowly, like a storm brewing, not yet released. Her hands gripped his wrists, pinning them to the stone above his head. She set the pace. Not fast, not soft, controlled, deliberate. Each motion a lesson in what it meant to be kept instead of owned. He tried to kiss her. She pulled back. Not yet. Her mouth moved to his throat, his jaw, his collarbone. Her nails traced the line of his ribs. He exhaled like a man surviving his own undoing. She didn't moan. She breathed. Each breath matched the rise of her hips. Her eyes never left his, even when his did. "Stay here," she whispered. "Stay with me." He nodded, eyes locked with hers. This time, he didn't run from the ache. When she came, it was silent. No scream, no spectacle. Just a slow tremble through her thighs and a sharp inhale that never exhaled. Her body stilled above his. Her eyes closed, then opened, and only then did she release his wrists. He reached up, slowly, and touched her face, not with hunger, with reverence. "Thank you," he said, not because she gave him pleasure, but because she gave him back to himself. She rested her forehead to his. "You were always powerful," she whispered. "You just never knew how to offer it." They stayed like that for a while, still joined, no rush to part, no tension left between them, just breath, and water, and sky. Later they slipped back into the pool, washing the heat from their bodies. He watched her swim a few strokes away, then turn, floating, hair spreading around her like ink. She looked free, not because he'd given her anything, because she had taken everything back, and let him meet her there. When they stepped out of the water, he wrapped her robe around her shoulders, not as an owner, not as a lover, as a witness. They didn't speak walking back to the villa. No words were needed. Something sacred had already been said, without language, without question. That night, in bed, they didn't make love again. They simply slept, her back to his chest, his hand resting on her stomach, their legs tangled like vines on stone. No pressure, no pretense, only rhythm, and quiet, and fire that no longer burned to consume, but to warm. Morning arrived quietly. Golden light filtered through the linen curtains, stretching across the bed in slow ribbons. Claudia stirred first. Klopp was still asleep, his breath steady, one hand resting softly against her hip. She looked at him for a long moment, not out of longing, not out of nostalgia, but with a clear, still awareness of who he was now, and who she had become without him. She gently lifted his hand from her body, rose from the bed, and wrapped herself in the same robe he'd once tied around her shoulders. The kitchen was already warm with scent, rosemary, baked eggs, toasted rye. One of the staff nodded as she entered. "Just tea," Claudia said softly. They knew her rhythms. She stepped out to the terrace with a porcelain cup in hand and sat alone, beneath the shade of the olive tree that crowned the east garden. It had been planted on the day she bought the estate. It had grown slowly, but with certainty. Much like her, Klopp woke to absence. He reached instinctively to the space beside him and found only fabric, still warm but empty. He sat up, blinked against the morning haze, and pulled on the linen shirt he'd draped over a chair the night before. When he entered the kitchen, no one announced him. No one offered him anything. This wasn't his domain, and he no longer expected it to be. He found Claudia outside, exactly where she'd positioned herself, centered, composed, in no need of ceremony. He approached. She didn't invite him to sit, but he did anyway. For a while, they didn't speak. Birdsong hummed around them, a gentle soundtrack to the clarity between them. Finally, she said, "That night was not a reconciliation." He nodded. "I know. It wasn't a return. I didn't assume it was." She turned her face toward him. "You still carry expectation in your silence. Do you know that?" He didn't flinch. "I'm learning to carry less." She sipped her tea. "You once told me I was the only person who didn't need to earn my place beside you. I remember." "You lied." His throat tightened. She continued, "I spent years trying to hold a place in your life that was never truly mine. You gave it to me when it suited you. You took it back when you needed control." He bowed his head slightly. "I see that now." She leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, robe open at the collar. "I brought you here to show you who I am now, not to seduce you, not to restart something that died without a funeral." He looked up at her. "And last night?" Her voice was calm. "Last night was power, not romance, not reconciliation." He absorbed it. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. "You still love me," he said quietly. "Yes, but not the way I want." "No." He nodded slowly. "I don't own you." Her eyes sharpened. "You never did." The quiet held between them. Then, softly, "Does this mean goodbye?" Claudia tilted her head. "Goodbye implies ending." He waited. She clarified, "This is not an ending, it's a definition." He took a long breath. "I want to stay close to you." "That depends on what?" "On whether you understand the new shape of closeness." She stood, robe falling open slightly as the breeze kissed the skin beneath. He didn't stare, not because he wasn't drawn to her, but because he finally understood reverence. Claudia looked down at him. "You can't stay if you're waiting for what we had." "I'm not." "Good, because that woman doesn't exist anymore." He stood with her. "I don't want her." Claudia's voice dropped lower. "You used to need me soft, now you need me honest. Can you live with that?" He stepped closer, slowly. "I want what's real." She moved past him, walking back toward the villa. He didn't follow immediately. She called back without turning around. "Today is for boundaries." That single sentence anchored everything. He wasn't invited to touch her. He wasn't allowed to linger in memory. Not anymore. Instead, he spent the day in the library, not reading, sorting. He pulled journals from her collection, looked at the way she annotated the margins, how she responded to authors with disagreement, not worship. He realized she never once tried to erase her pain from the pages. She just used it as material. Late afternoon, they crossed paths in the east corridor. She was on the phone, speaking French, giving quiet instruction to someone about a shipment of bath oils delayed in customs. Her hand rested on a column as she listened. He stopped at a respectful distance. She finished the call, then turned to him. "I'm flying to Morocco tomorrow." He nodded. "For how long?" "Hello, my wonderful family. I know this heartfelt story touched you, and it's the kind of story you wouldn't want to enjoy alone. So please, share it with your friends and loved ones, so they too can experience these exciting and meaningful love stories that are too beautiful to miss. And don't forget, subscribe to our channel, Love and Twilight, so you never miss a single story we bring to you every day, filled with romance, wisdom, and magic. A week. Can I see you before you leave?" Claudia considered this. Then, "Only if you understand that presence isn't an audition." His voice steadied. "I'm not here to pass. I'm here to practice." That night, he didn't knock on her door. He didn't ask to share a bed. He sat in the garden instead, alone, writing, not to her, to himself. "You're not owed closeness." You're not promised return, but you are allowed to learn, and that must be enough. He folded the paper and placed it under a stone. No one would read it, but he didn't need them to. The moon hung high over the estate, pale and unwavering, casting soft light over the terrace where Claudia stood alone. Her shawl clung to her arms as the night breeze slipped through the garden. Her eyes weren't fixed on anything in particular, just the quiet unfolding of another day coming to a close. Klopp appeared from the shadows behind the corridor, not announcing himself, but not hiding either. She didn't flinch, didn't ask why he was there. He approached slowly, stopping a few paces behind her. "I didn't sleep much," he said. "I didn't expect you to," she replied. A silence stretched between them, calm but aware. Then she turned halfway. "Speak." He didn't hesitate this time. "I used to count silence as punishment," he began. She raised a brow, but said nothing. "But with you, it was the first time it ever felt sacred." He stepped closer. "I didn't understand how sacred until I lost it." Her gaze dropped briefly. "You didn't lose it. You discarded it." He nodded. "True." She exhaled. The admission didn't flatter her. It exhausted her. "Do you know how many nights I sat at that dining table waiting for you to ask me about my mind?" she said, voice steady but tight. He listened. "I would come alive for you. I would bend, bloom, break. And still, your eyes looked past me as if I were some echo of yourself." His eyes closed for a moment, shame resting just beneath his skin. "I thought providing was enough," he said quietly. Claudia stepped closer, her voice low. "You thought success equaled presence." He looked at her. "I thought I was loving you." She shook her head, slowly. "You were loving your idea of me." He reached for the stone railing and leaned into it. "I was raised to believe that love meant shielding, not sharing. I carried everything in silence, thinking it made me strong." She walked to his side. "And I was raised to believe silence meant dismissal." He turned to her. "Our love languages were war and surrender." Claudia's lips twitched in a sad, knowing way. "You were always at war." The wind picked up slightly, and she pulled the shawl tighter around herself. Klopp hesitated, then removed his jacket and offered it. She accepted, not out of need, out of grace. He looked at her wrapped in it and murmured, "You were the first person who scared me." Claudia glanced at him, curious. "Why?" "Because you didn't need me. You chose me, and I had no blueprint for how to stay chosen." She tilted her head. "And so, you punished me for making you feel replaceable." His voice cracked slightly. "I tried to outpace my fear instead of sitting with it." The moonlight carved sharp edges across the stones around them. Their shadows danced behind them, not touching. Claudia stepped in front of him again. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "All of it?" "No. You. Who you were." He paused, then shook his head. "No, I regret who I pretended to be to survive in your presence." She didn't react, just let the words hang. He continued, softer now. "I wasn't ready for a woman who saw all of me and didn't flinch, so I flinched instead. I buried softness in ambition. I masked longing in control. I mistook devotion for dependence." Claudia's jaw clenched. "I used to wonder if I was too much." "You were never too much," he said, immediate and firm. She blinked slowly. "I used to lie awake wondering if I made you smaller, by needing you." Klopp moved toward her again, slowly. "No, you made me visible. I just didn't know how to look back at you." She looked down at the tiles between them. "I bled in silence," she said. "And you never once asked where the wound was." His voice wavered. "I didn't think you would bleed." They stood in the open now, the garden surrounding them in muted hush. She looked up again. "Tell me one thing you've never admitted, not even to yourself." He inhaled, long and slow. Then, "I wanted to be rescued too." Her breath caught. He continued, "I never said it out loud, but I wanted someone to look at me the way I looked at the world, like I was worth the gentleness I never offered." Claudia's eyes softened. "And when I tried," she whispered. "I thought it was a trick," he said. Because I couldn't accept what I didn't understand." Claudia stepped closer again. Their feet nearly touched. Their hands did not. She said, "You never had to become someone else for me, just someone honest." He nodded, slowly. "I'm not asking for another chance." Her brow lifted. Then what are you asking for? He took a breath. Permission to stay in your life, even at the edges, just as I am. Claudia's eyes searched his, and for the first time in years, she saw no performance behind them. No armor, no chase, only truth. She reached forward and gently placed her hand on his heart, not as a lover, as a witness. She looked up at him, voice barely above a whisper. You may stay, but even in that permission, there was a gate, and he knew not to walk through it unless invited. He lowered his head slightly in gratitude, not for her forgiveness, but for her presence. The wind curled between them again, and for once, it didn't carry anything away. She walked into the study barefoot. The silk robe fell open at the thigh, her posture tall, neck exposed, eyes alert. There was no softness in her gaze, only clarity, and that clarity did more to him than any whispered promise ever could. Klopp looked up from the journal he'd been reading, hers, old, from before the divorce. She let him read it. She wanted him to, but this woman standing in front of him wasn't the one who wrote those entries. That Claudia had been tender to a fault, patient beyond reason, fragile in ways no one had protected. The Claudia before him now was untamed. You're not going to say anything? She asked, stepping into the room like she owned more than the space, like she owned her breath, her time, her fire. He swallowed. I've been trying to match this woman in the pages. To you now. She leaned against the desk, crossing one leg over the other, her calf brushing his thigh. You won't find her anymore. He nodded. That's what terrifies me, he said quietly. Claudia smiled, not kindly, but with bite. And excites you? He met her gaze. Yes. Flash. Memory hit him without warning. That night, the night they first moved into the old penthouse, before the estate, before the silence. Claudia had lit candles all around their bedroom, her eyes wide, her body hesitant. She'd asked, Is this what you want? He hadn't answered, not because he didn't want her, but because he didn't know how to hold both her desire and his own expectations. He'd taken her, gently, thoroughly, but she hadn't climaxed. She'd moaned his name, but her mind had been elsewhere. Even then she was performing softness. Now, this Claudia would never ask permission to burn. She would start the fire. She was the fire. I used to wait for your hands, she said suddenly, jolting him from memory. Now I wait for my own pulse to tell me where I want to be touched. He exhaled. Deep. Slow. Claudia walked around the desk, stopped behind him, ran her fingers over the edge of his jaw. You built kingdoms, she murmured, but you couldn't hold a woman whose fire made your shadows feel exposed. He turned slightly. I thought I was in control, he admitted. No, she said, pulling his collar open. You were in denial. She climbed onto his lap. Not rushed, not hesitant, and he didn't dare move. Not yet. Not until her robe opened fully. She took his hands and placed them on her thighs. Say it. He knew what she meant. I wanted this version of you, more than I ever admitted. Claudia lowered her lips to his ear. I am this version now, always. He closed his eyes, breathed in her scent, jasmine, wood, sweat, something untamed. His heart pounded, not from lust, but from knowing he'd never be in charge here again. Not emotionally, not physically, and he didn't want to be. Flash again. The old Claudia, quiet beneath him, eyes wide, waiting for direction. Now, she rocked her hips slowly, not to entice him, but to feel herself. She moaned low, not for his approval, but because her own body was speaking back. Her fingers slid into his hair. I don't need gentleness tonight, she said. Klopp's voice was rough. I won't offer it unless you ask. She smiled again, wicked and radiant. Then maybe I'll ask later. She pulled back slightly and looked at him full on. You still think love is service, she said. He looked confused. And it's not. No. Love is recognition, she replied. You serve what you fear losing. You see what you value. You worship what you want to become. Her words knocked the breath out of him. Because in this moment, he saw her, not just her body, not just the woman he once married. He saw the force, the rebellion, the rebirth. His hands gripped her hips, not to control, but to anchor himself in this truth. I don't want to dominate you anymore, he whispered. She arched forward. Then let me break you a little. He nodded. Gladly, she guided his mouth to her chest. Not gently, not roughly, with purpose. And as he kissed her skin, he felt something inside him collapse, something he'd been holding on to for years. Control. It left him, replaced by presence, by awe, by hunger born not of ownership, but of reverence. Later, as they lay on the carpet, bodies open to the air, Claudia traced his chest with a single fingertip. "You didn't ask to be loved like this," she said. "No, but you stayed. I didn't want to leave." She looked into his eyes. "Because you finally see me?" He nodded. "And I see myself in the reflection." She leaned into him, her voice now softer, slower. "I am not the woman who bled for silence anymore, and I am not the man who buried his heart in power. They lay there, equal, raw, present, this version of you." He began, searching for words. "Yes?" she asked. He swallowed. "This, Claudia, is wildfire." She smiled against his neck. "And you?" He paused. "I'm learning to burn without trying to control the flame." They didn't kiss again that night. They didn't need to. What passed between them had no name. Only breath. Only truth. Only the slow unraveling of a man surrendering to a woman who no longer fit inside the lines he'd once drawn for her. Sunlight streamed through the open windows, spilling golden warmth across the floorboards. Provence had a way of making mornings feel like renewal, like the earth itself exhaled peace. Klopp stepped out of the guest room, barefoot, shirt loose, a rare calm softening the lines of his face. For once, his phone wasn't in his hand. No calls, no numbers, no headlines, only the quiet echo of birds outside and the faint scent of lavender drifting in from the breeze. Then, laughter, high-pitched, bright, unmistakably young. It came from the garden. He moved toward the sound, drawn by something primal, something unfamiliar in its purity. Claudia was already outside, sitting on a blanket spread beneath a blooming lemon tree. Her legs tucked under her, robe falling open at the knee, hair loose, a porcelain teacup in one hand, her other outstretched, catching a ball tossed by a boy. A little boy. 5? Maybe 6. His curls bounced as he ran. His joy rang through the air, effortless. Klopp froze behind the hedge, watching, blinking, struggling to align what he saw with what he knew. The boy darted toward Claudia and tackled her mid-waist. She laughed, not the restrained kind he'd once known, but deep and full. The boy leaned back in her lap, his hands tangled in her robe, his cheeks flushed from play. Claudia whispered something into his ear. The child nodded and ran toward the tall sunflowers, chasing a butterfly. Only then did she look up and see Klopp standing there. She didn't react with surprise, only stillness, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. He stepped forward slowly into the light, gaze still fixed on the boy weaving between garden rows. "Claudia." Her name broke out of his chest like a question. She set her teacup down, said nothing at first. He tried again, voice rougher this time. "That child?" "Yes," she said softly. Still no panic, no evasion, only quiet confirmation. "He's mine?" Klopp asked, though his throat felt dry. She tilted her head. "No," she corrected gently. "He's ours." Time collapsed inside him. Every step he'd taken that morning, every memory of their past, the words they'd flung, the nights they'd lost, it all tangled in that one sentence. Ours. He looked toward the boy again. And now, it was undeniable. The jawline, the curve of his ear, the way he furrowed his brow while concentrating on the butterfly. Klopp sank onto the bench nearby, elbows on knees, head in his hands. Claudia didn't rush to him. She gave him space. She let him feel. "How?" he finally asked. "When?" Her fingers trailed the rim of the teacup. "You remember the last trip to the vineyard, before the board scandal?" He looked up. "That weekend where I left early for the investor call?" She nodded. "I was already a week late. Took a test when you left. I knew the moment I saw the result, but by then, we were unraveling." His jaw clenched. "I should have stayed. She held up a hand. "No revisions, just truth." He exhaled hard. "And you never told me." "I didn't plan to." At first it felt like preservation. Then it became punishment. Then protection. His voice lowered. "Protection from me. From everything you were then. You were angry, consumed, cold. You would have tried to own him the same way you tried to control everything. Klopp nodded slowly. She was right. Back then, he would have branded the boy with his name, paraded him, used him to rewrite a narrative he hadn't earned. Now, he wasn't sure he even deserved to be in the same garden. The boy, Leo, ran back over, hands full of crushed petals. "Mommy, I made a perfume." Claudia smiled and cupped his cheek. "It smells perfect, mon cœur." He turned to Klopp, eyes curious. "Who's that man?" Klopp swallowed. His throat burned. Claudia glanced at him, then back to her son. "That's someone very important, someone who might be around more often now." The boy considered that, then shrugged and handed Klopp a flower. "Hi." Just like that. No suspicion, no tension, just the unfiltered acceptance of a child who hadn't learned bitterness. Klopp took the flower. His fingers shook. "Hi, Leo." The boy grinned. "You talk like Mommy when she's mad at the blender." Claudia chuckled. "Okay, enough for now. Go draw what you saw." Leo dashed toward the kitchen, leaving a trail of grass and energy behind him. Silence wrapped the garden again. But this one was different. Not cold, just full. Klopp looked at her. "I missed everything." She nodded. "You did?" Tears threatened, but he blinked them back. "I want to know him." Claudia stood, folding the blanket calmly. "That depends. On what?" She met his eyes. "On whether you're showing up to father him or fix your guilt." He didn't answer right away, because she didn't want promises. She wanted presence. And that was harder, but more real. He nodded once, then let me earn it. She paused, studied his face, and finally said, "Start with breakfast. He likes pears, sliced thin, not mashed. And don't mention space. He thinks rockets are boring." Klopp smiled faintly through the ache. "Got it." She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "One more thing." He looked up. "Yes? Don't call him son until he calls you something first." And with that, she vanished inside. Klopp remained on the bench, the flower still in his hand, heart still in pieces. But for the first time, those pieces had somewhere to go. Claudia stood by the window, watching as Klopp crouched awkwardly beside the breakfast table, attempting to slice pears thin enough for Leo's precise taste. The boy supervised, with a serious focus only children could muster, occasionally correcting Klopp's technique with the authority of a little king. There was laughter, light conversation, but under it, something unsaid still throbbed. Later that morning, when Leo had retreated to the drawing room with colored pencils and cartoons in another language, Claudia walked out onto the veranda where Klopp sat, cradling his mug like it held more than just tea. He didn't look up as she joined him. The air was warm, the silence patient. Finally, she spoke. "You want to know why I stayed silent?" He turned his eyes to hers. Tired, raw. "Yes." Claudia sat across from him, not fidgeting, not softening the edge of her truth. "I didn't keep him from you out of spite," she began. "That would have been easy, easier than what it really was." Klopp leaned back, arms folded. "Then what was it?" "Fear." He scoffed slightly, not in mockery, but disbelief. "You were never afraid of anything." She held his gaze. "Not true. I was terrified of becoming invisible." He stilled. "I watched how you handled everything, your staff, your investors, the press. You managed people. You didn't relate to them. And I knew. The moment I said I was pregnant, that's what I'd become, another problem to manage." The words struck with surgical precision. He swallowed. "You thought I'd see him as a problem?" "I knew you'd see him as legacy," she corrected. "A continuation of your name, your empire, but not as a boy who would need you at 3 a.m. when his lungs fought him. Not as a child who hated loud noises and needed someone to hold his silence." Klopp lowered his gaze. "I would have tried," he muttered. "Yes," she agreed. "You would have tried, with your rules, your schedules, your iron loyalty to outcome. But Leo didn't need a father who could try. He needed someone who could be." Her voice softened, not in pity, but in clarity. "You weren't ready, Klopp. Not then." He exhaled hard, like her words had knocked wind from his chest. And maybe they had, because deep down, he'd always prided himself on being ready, always prepared, always ahead. But when it came to something as fragile and chaotic as fatherhood, She had been right to doubt. He looked out toward the garden, where Leo's drawings fluttered on the table like flags in the wind. "I think the hardest part," he said finally, "is realizing you protected him from a version of me I was proud of back then." Claudia didn't gloat. She nodded slowly. "That version of you could have built him a mansion, yes, but he would have starved in it." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, fingers clasped tight. "I was angry when we divorced. Not because of what ended, but because you left before I understood what I'd broken." A pause. "And now I look at him, and I see what I missed. What I could have known, what I could have held." Claudia's eyes didn't tear up, but they softened. "I used to pray you'd ask about him," she whispered, "even without knowing that maybe your soul would feel something missing." Klopp turned toward her. "I did." She blinked. "I didn't know what it was then. I just knew that no matter how many deals I signed or how many nights I spent with strangers trying to numb the ache, there was something echoing in me, something unfinished." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was frayed at the edges. He handed it to her. She unfolded it slowly. It was a note, handwritten, her handwriting, from 5 years ago. "I forgive you," it said, "but I'm choosing silence now. For me, for the baby." Claudia looked up, stunned. "You kept this?" "It's been in every suit pocket I've worn since the day I found it," he said. "You never replied." "I didn't know how," he admitted. "And by the time I thought I could, I didn't think I deserved the right." They sat in silence for a while, until Claudia finally asked, "What do you want now, Klopp?" He didn't answer right away, because the truth had shifted. It wasn't just about being present for a child or rekindling something broken. It was about surrendering to what he couldn't control. "I want to learn how to be someone he chooses to trust," Klopp said. "Not because he has to, but because I earn it." She nodded slowly. "That's a beginning." He looked up. "Why tell me now?" Her eyes searched his. "You changed. How can you tell? You're not asking me for a chance. You're asking me to understand what you missed." She stood, stepping closer. "And that is the first sign of someone who's ready to father, not just parent." The breeze lifted a strand of her hair. He reached to tuck it behind her ear, hesitated. She let him. But it wasn't romantic. It was grounding. Like two people sharing the same scar, years later, acknowledging it without shame. Inside, Leo called out, "Mommy, the blue ran out." Claudia turned toward the door. "I'll get him another crayon," she said. Klopp stood too. "Let me." She paused, looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. He disappeared inside, and Claudia remained on the veranda, holding the old note in her hand, heart heavy with grief, but no longer carrying it alone. Klopp sat cross-legged on the sunlit floor, a box of colored pencils open beside him. Leo hunched over a wide sketch pad, his brows furrowed in concentration. His tiny tongue peeked from the corner of his mouth as he colored in. A spaceship, not a rocket, but a solar racer, as he'd called it. "Are the rays okay in purple?" Leo asked, not looking up. Klopp glanced over. "They're perfect. Even if real ones aren't purple?" "Even more so," Klopp said. Leo nodded, satisfied, and shaded faster. No forced conversation, no strained effort to impress, just a quiet rhythm, pencil strokes, and soft breaths. From the hallway, Claudia leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the two from a distance. She said nothing, did nothing, just observed. There was something about the way Klopp let the boy lead, how he didn't interrupt, didn't correct. That alone told her everything she needed to know about how far he'd come. Once upon a time he would have commandeered the drawing, would have turned it into a lesson on engineering or business, some structured attempt to infuse value into the moment. But now? He followed Leo's cues, laughed when the lines went wild, admired what he didn't understand. Inside the room, Klopp tilted his head, watching the boy color a tiny figure in the corner of the page. "Who's that?" Leo kept coloring. "That's me." "And that's Mommy." He pointed with his pencil to a taller figure beside the small one, then paused. "Still drawing you," he said. Klopp's throat caught. He waited. Leo's fingers danced across the page, then drew a third figure, slightly, off to the side, with broad shoulders and a pair of square glasses. He didn't say anything more, just finished the outline, and went back to coloring. Klopp felt something shift in his chest. Not a break, A quiet softening. 10 minutes passed. Then Leo suddenly stood up, arms akimbo. I'm hungry. Are you good at toast? Klopp smirked. I'm great at toast. Without burning? Only a little. Leo grinned and marched toward the kitchen. Klopp followed, amused. They cooked together, if cooked meant dropping 2 slices of bread, into a machine and staring at it like it was launching a satellite. Leo narrated every second. First it glows, then it hums, and then it clicks, like a trap door in a movie. Klopp nodded, hands behind his back. You know a lot about toasters. I read. A lot. Mommy says I'm like her, always asking why. Do you think you are like her? Leo shrugged. She's strong. She doesn't cry when her hand gets burned, and she fixed the pipe under the sink even when the man said she couldn't. Klopp leaned on the counter. Sounds like a superhero. She is one, Leo said, matter of fact. She just doesn't wear a cape. The toast popped. Leo jumped, then laughed. Klopp caught the slices mid-air. The boy clapped. Claudia, still unseen at the kitchen entrance, smiled softly to herself and walked away. Later that afternoon, they sat in the garden again. Leo leaned against Klopp's side, showing him a drawing of their solar racer family. This one's you, he said, pointing to the tall figure. You're in charge of navigation. Why me? Because Mommy says you used to get lost in your work, so now you have to learn directions. Klopp burst out laughing. That's fair. The boy pointed again. She said you don't always need a map. Sometimes you just need to look up. Klopp stared at him. Leo wasn't quoting blindly. He understood. In that moment, Klopp realized this child didn't need wealth, didn't. He needed a surname carved into marble or shares in a holding company. He needed presence. He needed stories before bed. He needed someone who'd sit through a drawing with uneven lines and still call it brilliant. Leo. Yeah? Do you like having me here? Leo didn't rush his answer. He looked up at Klopp. You're quiet, not like Mommy's friends. They talk and talk, but you listen. I try to. You're funny. Not the laugh out loud kind, but the inside kind, like my teddy bear. Klopp's eyes brimmed. That's a good thing, right? Leo nodded. It's the best thing. From the upstairs balcony, Claudia stood silently, watching, remembering. The Klopp she married had been magnetic, ambitious, powerful, and endlessly intense. But this Klopp, the one crouched on the grass, letting his dress shirt wrinkle, under a 6-year-old's elbow, this man held something more enduring, something tender. She stepped inside and sat at her writing desk, opened a notebook. Wrote one line. He has his father's eyes, but his mother's strength. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best possible outcome. The night was thick with stars, the air humming with lavender and quiet resolve. Provence had a way of pressing stillness onto the heart. It made every decision feel sacred. Klopp sat on the back steps, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the moonlight spilling over the stone path. His shirt was rumpled, sleeves rolled up. His palms, still dusty from pruning Leo's wildflower patch earlier, rested open in surrender. He didn't hear her approach, but he felt her. Claudia stepped down beside him and sat, folding her legs underneath her. She didn't speak, not yet. She waited, and he took the cue. I don't want to be a visitor, Klopp said, his voice low. Not in his life, not in yours. Claudia exhaled softly. Then what do you want to be? He turned to her. A fixture, a constant. The person he can count on, the one you can count on. She studied him in silence, eyes sharp but not cold. You're asking for a role in a life that's already in motion, she said. You don't get to step in and lead like before. I know. No titles, no control. He nodded. I don't want control. I want access, permission. Claudia stood, brushing her hands against her dress. Then you'll have to earn it. Klopp rose to his feet. I will. Not with promises, she said. With service. That word caught him off guard. Service? She looked him in the eye. Love is not performance, Klopp. It's not grand gestures. It's not a speech or a 5-year plan. It's persistence. Showing up. Taking the lower place when you want the pedestal. Washing dishes after you make the toast. Sitting beside your son when he cries, even if he doesn't want to talk. He listened, breath slowing. I used to love you for your brilliance, she continued. Your sharpness, your vision. She stepped closer. But now, Now I only have space in my life for someone who can kneel, not conquer. The words didn't humiliate him. They broke something rigid inside. Because he knew. She wasn't asking for weakness. She was calling forth something deeper. A version of love that didn't shine, but served. The next morning, Claudia woke to the sound of soft footsteps downstairs. She wrapped herself in a robe and walked into the kitchen. And stopped. Klopp stood at the sink, elbow deep in soap suds, scrubbing the pan from Leo's breakfast. Dishes were stacked neatly. Counter cleaned. She didn't announce herself. She just leaned against the doorway. Later that day, she noticed a change in Leo's toy bin, sorted by type, with soft toys freshly brushed and books organized by story theme. That night, Klopp took the garbage out without being asked. He fixed the squeaky hinge on the garden gate. He sat through all of Leo's adventures in Dynaland without glancing at his phone once. There were no speeches, no declarations, just acts of quiet effort. One evening, Claudia asked, "What changed?" Klopp, holding Leo's folded pajamas in his hands, replied, "I stopped asking what I deserved and started asking what you two needed." She blinked, lips parting slightly. That wasn't the man she'd divorced. That was someone new. Someone trustworthy. But still, she wasn't rushing, wasn't offering love like a door flung open. She observed. She measured his persistence. A week passed. Then, too, one morning, Leo had a meltdown over a broken toy. Klopp sat cross-legged on the floor beside him, letting him cry. Not fixing, not teaching, just being. Claudia peeked from the hall and saw her son curl into the crook of his father's arm and fall asleep, still sniffling but safe. That night, Claudia invited Klopp to stay for dinner, not as a guest, but as part of the table. He carved the roast, poured the juice. Leo reached for his hand during grace. Later, as the stars reclaimed the sky, Claudia and Klopp sat on the garden bench. She turned to him, expression unreadable. "You said you wanted to be part of this life. I still do." Her voice was quiet. "Then keep showing up." His eyes never left hers. "I will. Every morning, every night, even when I don't know what I'm doing." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe there's a seat for you after all." The lights in the cottage dimmed as the evening settled into silence. Outside, a hush fell over the lavender fields, while inside, Klopp stood, barefoot at the threshold of Claudia's room, hesitant but drawn. She sat cross-legged on the bed, hair wrapped in a silk scarf, an open book in her lap. A warm lamp cast honeyed light across her collarbone, softening the sharp lines of her past strength. Her gaze flicked up to meet his. "You're still holding tension in your shoulders," she said quietly. He nodded, almost embarrassed. "I don't know how to relax anymore." She set the book aside. "Come here." He crossed the room slowly, like a man approaching a church altar, not a bed. His heart pulsed in his throat. "Sit," she whispered. He obeyed. Claudia reached up and unbuttoned his shirt, slow and deliberate. "You used to lead every moment like it was a battle," she murmured. "Do you know what makes a good father?" He shook his head. "A man who isn't afraid to kneel, especially before his child's needs. Before love." She slid the shirt off his shoulders, fingertips grazing skin he didn't realize had gone cold. He shivered, not from chill but from memory. "Let me show you what softness looks like," she said. And she did. Not with aggression, not with haste, but with hands that guided, not demanded, with kisses that healed, not claimed. He wasn't her master tonight. He was her student. Her lips moved from his collarbone to his sternum, slow and reverent. His breath staggered. "This," she whispered, "is where your heart broke open." She kissed it. "And this," her fingers traced down to his ribs, "is where you started to rebuild." Claudia pushed him gently onto his back, crawling over him like moonlight. He didn't touch her. "Not yet." She guided his hands. "Hold my waist, not to grip, but to feel." He did. "Now my back." Not to push, but to honor. His hands trembled as he followed. Then her body molded into his, and everything unlearned was relearned. This wasn't domination. This wasn't conquest. This was surrender of ego. This was giving and receiving, breathing in rhythm, gasping without shame. He moaned her name, not in command, but in reverence. She arched above him, hair falling over her shoulder like a curtain, eyes locked on his as she moved, not faster, but deeper, teaching him not how to take, how to feel. When he finally reached for her fully, it wasn't desperation. It was devotion. He held her like the miracle she was, mother of his son, breaker of his pride, balm to his emptiness. Afterwards, they lay tangled, sweat cooling, sheets strewn. Claudia traced the scar on his lower hip with the back of her fingernail. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I never knew what it meant to be a man," Klopp whispered, voice raw. "And now?" "I think it starts here," he said, laying her hand over his chest, "and here, guiding it to rest over her own." She kissed his temple. "I'm not trying to remake you," she said. "I'm just holding a mirror." He turned to face her fully. "Then don't ever put it down." In the early morning, before the sun dared rise, Klopp tiptoed to the kitchen. He packed Leo's lunch with shaky fingers, cutting strawberries into hearts, just like Claudia had shown him the night before. A sticky note sat on the counter. Her handwriting, "Love is learned and unlearned, again and again." He placed it in Leo's bag beside the sandwich. For once, he didn't need applause. The doing was enough. The golden fields of Provence rippled in the breeze, the rows of vines whispering in low afternoon hums. A checkered blanket lay on the slope beneath the olive tree, the same spot where Claudia had once nursed her heartache. Now, it held something entirely different. Klopp sat cross-legged, clumsily buttering a slice of baguette while Leo, sticky with grape juice, chased a beetle through the grass. "Papa, it's moving fast," the boy squealed. Klopp dropped the bread, wiped his hands on his jeans, and dove to the ground. "On your left," he called, pretending to be a secret agent. Leo shrieked with laughter. Claudia, watching from a few feet away, smiled behind her sunglasses. Her heart had learned the cost of false hope, but lately, it had started wondering what cautious hope might look like. They spent afternoons like this more often now. Klopp wasn't trying to impress. He was simply present. When Leo tripped, Klopp didn't scold. He knelt. When Claudia carried too many groceries, he didn't rush to take over. He just walked beside her, holding the heavier bag. One morning, Claudia caught Klopp on the porch with a spoon in his mouth and flour in his beard. "What are you doing?" she asked, arms folded. "Trying to figure out how to make your mother's lemon tart." "I found her old recipe card in the cupboard." She stepped closer, amused. "It's in French. You can't even pronounce zeste properly. I'm using Google Translate in prayer." He burned the crust twice. The third time, it was edible. Claudia didn't say anything, just ate slowly and nodded once. He grinned like he'd won a medal. There was no sudden forgiveness, no sweeping return to love. But there were tiny cracks in her armor, moments when she found herself laughing too easily, trusting his hands to carry her son across wet stones, letting her gaze linger when he walked past shirtless, towel slung, over one shoulder, humming something that sounded like contentment. He built Leo a bookshelf from scratch, not perfectly straight, but strong. He planted lavender near the window. He read bedtime stories, voices and all, even when exhausted. He stopped checking his emails, stopped answering investor calls, stopped trying to be anyone but Leo's father. And her, maybe. One evening, while drying dishes, Claudia turned to him. "Why are you still here?" He looked up, startled by the directness. "I thought I'd made that clear." "Say it again." He dried his hands, walked over, stood in front of her. "Because here is the only place that makes me feel like a man worth becoming." She didn't respond, just reached for another plate. But her hands trembled, just slightly, and he noticed, and said nothing. The next day, he let Leo paint his fingernails blue. "Boys can do colors too, right, Papa?" "Absolutely," Klopp said, holding out each finger. That night, Claudia walked in on him fast asleep on the couch, blue, Polish, smudged and dry, Leo curled into his chest like a kitten. She covered them both with a blanket and sat beside them. Something old inside her cracked again. This time, it didn't hurt. They started sharing morning tea again. Not every day, but some days. One morning, over the quiet steam of jasmine leaves, Claudia spoke without looking at him. "I used to dream of the three of us walking through a vineyard, like a family. Back when I was pregnant." Klopp's throat tightened. "I want to walk that dream into real life," he said. She didn't answer. But later that afternoon, she packed a picnic basket. They took the long way through the vineyard. Leo sat on Klopp's shoulders, humming a made-up tune. Claudia walked beside them, the sun casting a halo over her curls. It looked like a family, not perfectly restored, but real. At the end of the trail, Leo ran ahead. Klopp and Claudia sat on a bench carved from old stone, grapevines curling around the arch above. He looked over at her. "You still don't trust me," he said gently. Claudia turned toward the sun. "I don't trust easily. I don't expect you to." She faced him again. "But I'm starting to trust this." He held her gaze and nodded. Little moments of becoming. The evening air in Provence had its own perfume, part lavender, part nostalgia. The sky bled shades of copper and plum, a slow-burning promise over the horizon. Claudia leaned on the wrought iron balcony rail, a shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Below, the vineyard was alive with gentle laughter. Leo's giggles rang through the garden, chasing fireflies with a makeshift net. Klopp sat beside Claudia, his arm brushing hers with the kind of familiarity that had once been foreign, now quietly sacred. He said nothing for a long while, just watched his son and her. "Same place," Claudia whispered eventually, voice soft as linen. He turned toward her. She nodded toward the horizon. "This is where you asked me the first time." He swallowed. "I remember. You had a tie too tight and hands too nervous. You had wine on your lip and dared me not to chicken out." She chuckled. "And you didn't." "I meant it, even then." Claudia nodded. "I know." Silence stretched between them like silk, not cold, not tense, just real. The vineyard below shimmered under string lights Klopp had helped Leo hang earlier. It had taken them 2 hours, 3 dropped bulbs and more laughter than expected. Now the lights looked like stars drawn closer. Claudia sighed, folding her arms, leaning deeper into the memory. "I wasn't ready to be loved like I deserved back then," she said. "And you weren't ready to give anything that didn't come with a receipt." Klopp didn't argue. He knew she was right. "I didn't understand love without condition," he said, "or joy that doesn't demand proof. And now?" He looked at her fully. "I'm still learning," he admitted. "But I know this. I don't need a perfect ending. I just want the chance to try every day." She turned to him. "Try what?" "Try to love you better than I did yesterday." Below, Leo called up from the yard. "Mama, look! Papa made the fireflies dance." Claudia leaned over the balcony rail, smiling as Klopp waved back at the boy. "He's happy," she said. "He's free," Klopp replied. "And you?" Klopp exhaled, watching the boy twirl in circles. "I'm becoming." They stood quietly for a while longer. Claudia traced the rim of her mug, lips parting slowly. "I used to imagine a second proposal," she said. He looked at her. It wasn't grand. No flowers, no rehearsed speech. Klopp's breath caught in his chest. "Just 2 people," she continued, standing where it all began, no longer pretending. "Claudia." She met his eyes. No diamond needed, no crowd, just honesty. He stepped closer, not with flourish, not with a ring, but with reverence. He took her hands, held them like they were breakable. "I have no vows rehearsed," he said, voice steady. "Only what I've lived." She nodded. "I vow," he said slowly, "to never speak louder than our silence needs, to never fix what isn't broken, to show up before I'm asked, to see you, even when I'm tired, to learn our son's laughter like a language, to build safety before castles." Claudia's hands tightened slightly in his. "I vow to fall in love," he added again and again, "not just with your body, but your stubbornness, your fears, your questions, your fire." He swallowed. "And your silence." Her eyes shimmered. No tears fell, but her soul listened and heard. Below, Leo began humming again, off-key and perfect. A lullaby for love rewritten. Klopp didn't ask a question. He didn't go down on one knee. He didn't need to, because this wasn't a proposal. It was a restoration. Claudia leaned in, resting her forehead against his. "You finally sound like the man I once dreamed about," she whispered. He smiled, lips barely touching hers. "I finally feel like him." They stood there as the stars climbed higher. Hands joined, hearts steady, the boy's laughter echoing beneath them. No fanfare, just peace. Claudia stood by the window, the early morning sun painting golden streaks on the tiled floor. The vineyard beyond whispered in hushed tones as the breeze played through the leaves. A warm cup of tea in her hands, She watched Leo chase a butterfly barefoot in the garden. Her eyes didn't water. Not anymore. She had cried enough in the quiet years when motherhood felt like both a crown and a cage. But now she stood tall, not because someone lifted her, but because she learned how to rise. Behind her, Klopp leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching her, not possessively, not with the hunger of the man he once was, but with the quiet awe of a man who had learned. She turned slightly, aware of his gaze, but unbothered. "I thought I needed saving once," she said, not looking at him. "I know," he replied. "I used to think love was the rescue." He stepped forward slowly, saying nothing. "But the truth is," she turned now, facing him, "I saved myself." He didn't flinch, didn't try to argue, didn't reach to take credit for a journey that had never belonged to him. Instead, he nodded. "I see that now." Claudia stepped closer. She placed her mug down on the edge of the cabinet and looked him squarely in the eye. "You were a powerful man," she said, "but you were never a king until you served a queen." Klopp's eyes dropped, but not from guilt. He bowed his head, not in shame, but in reverence. She had waited years for him to do that. Not as apology, but as recognition. "I tried to lead," he said quietly, without knowing how to follow. Claudia's voice remained steady. "You tried to own what you didn't understand. I thought strength meant domination." "It doesn't," she said. "It never did." They stood in stillness, not frozen but free. She had come into her fullness, not in spite of pain, but because of it. "I watched you break," Klopp continued, "and still you rose, alone, with dignity, with the sun in one hand and silence in the other." Her chest rose, slow and proud. "I didn't rise for you," she replied. "I rose for him. And for me," he nodded. "I'm just grateful you still let me walk beside you." They moved into the kitchen together. No orchestration, no script, just hands that worked in rhythm, setting the table, slicing fruit, arranging bread. Laughing softly when Leo burst in with a stick pretending to be a knight. "Look," Leo cried. "I'm protecting the queen." Claudia chuckled. "What a noble knight you are." Klopp knelt before the boy. "Every good knight learns from a queen." Leo tilted his head. "And what about kings?" Klopp glanced at Claudia, then back to Leo. "Kings learn to kneel." Later that day, while Leo napped in a sun-warmed corner, Claudia and Klopp sat side by side in the garden. Birds chirped. Bees hummed. A calm that hadn't existed for years blanketed them. "I used to feel small in your world," she said. He looked at her. "You spoke so loudly, lived so publicly, took up all the space. I didn't know any other way," he confessed. Claudia nodded. "I know. But you," she added, voice soft, "you don't scare me anymore." He lowered his eyes again. She wasn't finished. "You don't overshadow me anymore either." She looked upward, letting the breeze graze her cheeks. "I am not your project, not your reflection, not your muse. I am not waiting to be rescued." Klopp inhaled slowly. "I know who you are now." "And who is that?" she asked. He turned toward her, not with flourish, not with practiced words, but with stillness. "You're the flame I kept trying to tame, when all I needed to do was warm my hands by it." She closed her eyes, letting that truth settle. Not for him, but for herself. He reached for her hand, slowly, reverently. She didn't pull away. "I don't want to write your story anymore," he said. She opened her eyes. "I just want to read the pages you offer." They sat like that for a long time, not in a fairy tale, not in a dream, but in something truer. And when Leo woke and ran into the garden calling Mama, Claudia rose, turned, and smiled at the man behind her. Not because she needed him, but because she chose him. And that made all the difference. The villa was cloaked in quiet. Not silence from emptiness, but the quiet born from healing. Moonlight spilled across the floorboards, silver and still. A gentle breeze pushed sheer curtains inward, letting the cool night air dance through the room. Claudia stood at the edge of the bed, brushing her fingers over the linen as though feeling the story it now held. Behind her, Klopp waited, not like a man entitled, but like one invited. She turned. He didn't speak. There were no declarations, no planned seduction, just eyes, his, softer than ever, hers, steady as firelight. Claudia stepped closer, unfastening the robe tied at her waist. It dropped silently to the floor, and in that one gesture, she offered more than her body. She offered truth. Klopp's hands didn't reach for her at first. He simply looked, like a man witnessing something holy. When he finally touched her, it was with awe, fingers gliding over her skin like memory relearned. No rush, no grasping, just reverence. She undressed him in return, not to claim, but to reveal. The man beneath the armor, no longer the titan who built empires. Just a man learning love's gentler language. Their lips met, slow, warm, no urgency, no fire to extinguish, just flames shared. They sank onto the bed like waves folding into one another. His hand cupped her cheek, hers pressed to his chest. The rhythm they found wasn't frantic, it was felt. Every sigh carried history. Every kiss redeemed silence. Claudia moved above him, guiding, not performing, and Klopp followed, not leading. They moved like a prayer without words. His hands mapped her back, learning anew. She arched into him, not from instinct, but from presence. Not a single moan was forced, not a single breath wasted. It was the slow unmaking of years of guardedness, the rebuilding of trust, not through vows, but through touch. He whispered her name, not as possession, but as reverence. Claudia answered with her eyes. There were no roles here, no giver, no taker, only receivers. Their rhythm slowed again, not to prolong pleasure, but to savor it. Claudia pressed her forehead to his, sweat between them, skin against skin. He held her waist like she was light. She gripped his shoulders like he was anchor, and when release came, it wasn't thunder. It was light, like something unlocking deep within both of them. No shouting, no climax for display, just two people, finally seen, after they didn't pull away. He lay on his side, tracing a lazy path from her shoulder to her hip. She ran her fingers through his hair, slow and absent-minded. No words needed. I used to think love had to prove itself, he murmured, after a long pause. Claudia didn't respond. She didn't need to. He continued anyway. But I think the truest kind worships without needing to explain why. She kissed his jaw, then his collarbone, then his chest, and lay against him. Breath even, body calm, heart open. Outside, the cicadas sang. Inside, two souls rested, not because they had no more to say, but because they'd finally said it the right way. The courtyard shimmered with golden light as guests arrived, many of them uncertain, curious, hopeful. Couples stepped out of luxury sedans and modest taxis alike. Some held hands loosely. Others didn't touch at all. But all had come because they'd heard something rare, a billionaire and a woman he once shattered. Were inviting the world to witness not a second chance at love, but a second chance at self. Claudia stood at the entryway in a flowing cream dress, minimal jewelry, her posture calm and commanding. Klopp stood beside her in tailored gray, not his usual black. Softer, open-collared, sleeves rolled. He didn't dominate the space. He shared it. Together, they welcomed each guest, not with titles, but with stories. "You're not alone," Claudia would whisper into the brief hugs. Klopp would follow with a firm nod and a soft smile. "You're not broken. You're rebuilding." This was the first of what they called the Vine Sessions, a retreat for divorced or separated couples, not necessarily to reunite, but to rediscover meaning and identity after heartache. Not therapy, not a boot camp, but a reorientation around love's second draft. In the large central hall, long tables were set, not in rows but in circles. Claudia's idea. "Circles force us to look one another in the eye," she had said. At one corner, a young boy ran through the garden hedge maze Klopp had commissioned weeks prior. His laughter was music between conversations. Leo, their son, their center, not because he carried a surname, but because he carried both their rhythms. Later that afternoon, Claudia stood before the seated couples and spoke, not from notes, not with strategy, just from the part of her that had once crumbled and rebuilt stronger. "I was a woman who thought silence protected me," she began. "A woman who thought raising a child alone was my punishment. But it wasn't. It was my path back to voice." Eyes across the room welled up. Some lowered in recognition. Some met hers boldly. Klopp stepped forward next. His voice was steady but stripped of performance. "I was a man who knew how to run a company," he said, "but not how to stay still enough to see the people closest to me. I confused provision with presence. and I wore power like armor instead of offering it like shelter. There were no cheers. Just a hush that told them everyone understood. Workshops followed, on co-parenting, CO healing, redefining intimacy after betrayal. Not led by Claudia or Klopp, but by facilitators they trusted. Their role was to witness, not instruct. And in that, they led best. At the vineyard that evening, guests lounged beneath string lights. Bottles of handcrafted wine, some labeled with Leo Red, were passed between tables. It was Klopp's idea to name their first vintage after the boy. "He's our beginning," he had told Claudia. "Not our aftermath." Claudia didn't just agree. She kissed his hand. As the fire pits were lit and blankets passed around, Leo climbed onto Klopp's lap, whispering a question too low for others to hear. "Are we a real family now?" Klopp paused, then kissed the boy's forehead. "We've always been. We just didn't know how to show it." Claudia watched from a few feet away, a fond smile playing on her lips. No jealousy, no hesitation, only peace. The boy didn't need to be the heir to a billion-dollar portfolio. He was now heir to something far rarer, a whole father, and a wholehearted mother. The next morning, Claudia walked the grounds with 2 retreat guests, both women, both once married to the same man. Now they were co-parenting and coexisting, navigating new definitions. "This place doesn't feel like a retreat," one said. "It feels like someone actually lived through the things we're still figuring out." Claudia smiled softly. "Because we did." In the villa library, Klopp hosted a circle of men, CEOs, artists, laborers, each with scars hidden under polished suits or calloused hands. They weren't here to fix anything, just to stop pretending they were fine. "I used to think manhood was measured by how many people I could impress," Klopp said. "Now I measure it by how few I let down." That circle stayed long after the session officially ended. That night, Claudia and Klopp reviewed the guest feedback in the study. They didn't just read comment cards, they absorbed them. "I learned how to listen again. I didn't forgive him, but I forgave me." I saw myself in her words, and I stopped blaming myself for staying too long. Klopp leaned back in his chair, deeply moved. "We're not just rewriting love for us," he said. Claudia closed the notebook. "No," she said. "We're building a world where love doesn't have to be perfect to be sacred." Later, as they lay in bed, Leo curled between them. Claudia whispered against Klopp's chest. "I never imagined this." Klopp stroked her hair. "I didn't deserve this." Claudia looked up. "No one deserves grace. That's why it's called grace." The next week, news articles appeared. Business outlets praising Klopp's unconventional pivot. Society magazines dubbing Claudia a quiet force in emotional wellness. Gossip pages wondering about the boy and the future of the Woods legacy. But the couple didn't respond, because none of those words mattered. Not compared to Leo calling Klopp daddy without being told to. Not compared to Claudia no longer flinching at love's name. Not compared to the silence between them now being filled with presence, not pain. Their empire was no longer a glass tower with velvet curtains. It was a garden, a retreat, a warm hand on a cold morning. And the boy? He didn't need to be molded into the next CEO. He was already something greater. A child loved by 2 people who learned to love themselves first. The vineyard was quiet now. The retreat guests had all left, some with new beginnings, others with necessary endings. But no one left unchanged. The house stood still in the afternoon sun, its walls humming with the echoes of laughter, confessions, healing. And in the upstairs study, Claudia wrote, not on her laptop, not in some official ledger of the estate, but in a letter to her son. "My dearest Leo," she began, ink flowing steadily across ivory parchment. "I never wanted to teach you how to be rich. I wanted to teach you how to be whole." Each word was chosen with the care of someone who had once let silence shape her fate. Outside the study, Klopp sat on the balcony, sketchpad in hand. He wasn't designing buildings anymore. He was designing a new fatherhood, one gesture at a time. He had just drawn Leo's tiny hand holding a garden spade and his own large one steadying it. It was symbolic of everything he was still learning. Redemption didn't come just because you returned. You earned your place, day by patient day. In the letter, Claudia continued, "Your father did not find his way back because I waited. He found it because he learned how to walk forward. He did not come to rescue me. He came to finally stand beside me." Downstairs, Leo sat at the kitchen island, painting a thank you card to one of the guests, a woman who had hugged him on the last day and whispered, "You remind me of the son I lost." He didn't fully understand grief, but he understood kindness, and sometimes that was enough. Claudia signed the letter softly. Then she opened a wooden box and placed it inside. Not for now, for later, when Leo would need not just answers, but reminders. Reminders of what love looked like after it was humbled, broken, reassembled. In the garden that evening, Claudia and Klopp walked side by side. No rush, no performance. He carried a small blanket. She carried a bowl of fruit. Leo ran ahead and laid out the fabric, yelling, "Picnic time!" Claudia laughed, the sound free and deep. Klopp knelt and opened a bottle of the vineyard's latest batch. "Still can't believe we're doing this," he said, looking around. "You mean loving without losing ourselves?" She teased. "No," he said, "loving because we found ourselves." Later that night, under the canopy of stars, Klopp carried a sleeping Leo to bed. Claudia stood in the doorway, arms folded gently, watching. "Will he remember any of this?" Klopp whispered. Claudia shook her head slowly. "Not like we do, but it'll shape him." "Into what?" She looked up at Klopp, her voice soft but certain. "Into a man who doesn't confuse dominance with love, who knows that vulnerability is strength, who learns not just how to return, but how to stay." They stood in silence for a long time, and then Claudia whispered the blessing she had never spoken aloud, one she'd once written only in her heart. "May our son grow without bitterness. May he know love that doesn't punish. May he seek truth over victory. And may he become the kind of man who understands that love is not something you win, it's something you honor." The next morning, the sun broke over the hills like a golden promise. And in the quiet, as Klopp brewed coffee and Claudia pulled fresh linen off the line, they didn't speak much, because the loudest stories were now the ones they lived. No more grand gestures, just ordinary grace. One meal, one walk, one moment of patience at a time. Love had returned, but not as a whirlwind, as a choice, made and remade. Every day. If you believe that the right love returns when both hearts are finally ready, comment, "It's never too late." Like, share, and subscribe to Love and Twilights for more powerful love stories that heal,